Sup, my fellas, don't forget to leave feedback, and enjoy the story. Russel Raymond. Raymond, hold on. The guards were genuinely shocked to see this name among the throng of people as they were verifying the identity of one man. Upon glancing at him, a guard questioned whether Raymond was actually the name of the founding family. Russel Raymond belongs to the nobility, but while his clothes were in such a horrible state, they had no idea what had happened to them. The guard informed him that he could continue as the inspection was now complete. The man responded that he was a Raymond, a direct descendant of the founders, when the second guard turned to face him and asked if he knew him. Astonished, the man inquired as to why he appeared so awful. Why does he dress so poorly for an aristocrat like him? Perhaps it indicates that the founding family is no longer as powerful as it once was. It seems like he even heard that the White Tower is currently searching for mercenaries, stated another guard. What could he be doing here, I wonder? An additional person left and declared that he wasn't even a Christian. What would motivate him to turn pro-mercenary? Even though the guy was moving on at this point, he could still hear their conversations. He simply grinned and said they were asking too many pointless questions. Gazing around him, he stood in front of the capital, the Camelot. He strolled toward the enchanted White Tower, which housed all of the kingdom's guards. As he looked up at it, he remembered how hard he had once worked to get there to keep his family from failing. They had to rush out of the castle after his father was killed in a bloody battle against the Empire. To reclaim and rebuild their territories, they needed to enter the magic tower. A young child, crying, yelled that he would not be separated from his mother. Around his neck, a ring hung from a chain. Simply put, their wishes weren't real dreams. Before he could ascend the tower, he was banished from the academy. It was announced to Russel, who stood with his head bowed, that he had earned 3 failing grades. The boy was informed by the man that this was a first in the academy's entire history. In theory, he could perform better, but he would undoubtedly be unable to advance to the next round. He asked him if he should think about pursuing another career since he knew it would be hard for him to put up with his man of powers becoming smaller. Raymond clenched his chest and mentally repeated the statement regarding the man of powers becoming smaller, because ever since his birth, these threads have been thin and weak. He was limited in how much mana he could release, but he was also limited in how much he could absorb. This was the cruelest penalty a mage could be given, but he was extremely fortunate. Somehow, in the course of his mercenary work, he managed to advance to the second round. Upon examining his injured hands, he concluded that he remained a low-level mage. He was standing there when a man in a white robe entered the room and announced that the day's registration for temporary employment had ended. Those who hadn't finished the process could return the following day, he said. People began to become irate, complaining that they had been waiting all day and were at a loss for what to do. The impoverished are said to never have to make a decision. Russian heard someone mention that the museum was supposedly inviting magicians for a while as he was seated against the wall with his head bowed. These people claimed that it appeared like they were only searching for first-round janitors. They claimed that they didn't even want to look in front of others. Russel sat against the wall for a while longer, breathing heavily. He reached into his pocket to feel for something and took out a tiny bag containing cash. He made up his mind to go there. The man suddenly found himself in front of the Louvre, a sizable museum. According to the man inside, their museum is the biggest in the entire kingdom. He went on to say that aristocrats would even be paying them a visit this week. Everything inside should therefore be immaculate. Russel lowered his head and paid attention to the man's words, adding that they needed to manage the wind carefully during the cleaning process to ensure that nothing was damaged due to their negligence. Ultimately, they would be held entirely accountable for it. Russel reasoned that he was being dramatic and that none of these exhibits were likely original in the first place. He was observing everyone else when he noticed something. For some reason, the dark door looked too familiar to him as he looked up at it. The chamber bore the name Hall of Fantastic Creatures. He read the sign and gave it some thought, but just then he felt a vibration in his pocket. He pulled out his ring and realized, though he didn't understand why, that it was the source of the sound. His mother's ring responded to this door for some reason he didn't understand. He looked at it again, feeling as though he was being drawn by fate to some unknown location by the sole force of his feet. The man who had been guiding them for a short while noticed when he opened the door and entered the room, and he inquired as to where one of the new hires had vanished. He began to call out to him, but the vibration from his mother's ring was growing stronger, and Russel was already standing in the hallway in front of the skeleton of some sort of creature. When he held the ring in his hand, he was unsure of its intentions. He inquired about the ring's desires. He recalled how he had been laughing with his mother while holding her hand down this hallway, next to the same skeleton. In addition, he remembered which way was behind the wall. Russel suddenly opened his eyes and moved to the location he had just remembered being, as though waking up from a trance. He noticed one of the exhibits there, hidden behind glass. It was described as the ancient dragon's heart. He studied this heart and the ring that bore a striking resemblance to a dragon's eye. As he started to put the ring on, Russel questioned her motivation for bringing him there and why she was crying. The vibration abruptly stopped as soon as the ring was on his finger, and the skeleton and heart began to radiate an odd energy. Russel assumed he was probably dreaming and that everything was alright, but all of a sudden red lightning engulfed his hand and a powerful charge of power passed through the dragon's heart, eye, and ring. He was confronted by a golden dragon who claimed that this was what made it possible for him to open his second eye. He promised to be the first stone laid in the foundation of a new mythology for Russel. For the benefit of all magic, he informed the enthralled Russel that he was offering him another chance. At that moment, Russel believed, everything suddenly became clear to him, the mechanism that had been turning the world suddenly stopped, and the long-awaited fate had finally arrived. The Dragon King's divine eye initiated Victor Russel's mission in the system window, checking the information about this world. He heard an extremely quiet, irate voice and was unable to identify the source or identity of the voice. It was his teacher, he realized. A heavy blow to the head from a book startled the boy out of his dream. He instantly rose from his chair, putting the teacher in front of his face. The teacher became enraged and remarked that although he was aware of the boy's excellent grades, he had never before permitted anyone to fall asleep in class. Russel, a lump on his head, simply stared at the teacher, unable to comprehend what was happening. Although Victor Hubbard was meant to be dead, he was still standing in front of him. He started glancing quickly at everyone in the classroom. He was the center of attention for everyone, but he was unaware of what was going on. Russel realized that he had most likely just traveled back in time when he chose to hold his face in his hands as a precaution. The whole thing that had happened to him had taken him completely by surprise. He had absolutely no idea how he had gotten to the past. The teacher informed the boy that although this behavior was completely unlike him, he would still find a way to discipline him for dozing off during class. Raymond hurried out of the classroom as soon as he was told to by him. He was unsure if the time travel could even be classified as magic and what had caused it. He recalled the time the dragon declared he was giving him another chance as it awoke. Russel had a good memory of what he said. He suddenly realized there was no ring on his finger when he looked at it. He pondered if his mother had been the one to assist him so greatly. The professor interrupted him, saying he had never dozed off in class before as he emerged from the classroom. All he did was bow his head and apologize for his actions. Professor Hubert invited him to his office for lunch, explaining that they would need to have a private conversation. Without opening his eyes, Russel answered that he understood his teacher. Professor Hubert said he would wait for Russel and went about his business. The boy blushed, realizing that he still kind of liked it even though he had no idea when he started getting into trouble. The teacher had already left, so he took care of her. He heard someone shouting at him at that precise moment, and he instantly lost his balance after being shoved simultaneously. He asked what idiot dared to do that. As he turned back, 3 tall guys were positioned behind him. He was reprimanded by one of them for taking too many liberties, but one of them caught him by the arm and stopped him, claiming that the professors were observing them. The same man claimed that although he had instructed Russel to take notes for him, he appeared to have fainted during class. Upon glancing at him, Russel recalled that his name was Coma Frederick. He advised Russel to use the restroom right away if he wanted to avoid passing away too soon. He looked at the boys' backs as they walked away from him, recalling that this had happened to him previously. But something caught his eye, and he noticed an odd program window in front of him. It had an inscription on it telling him to put his classmates who were making fun of him to their proper place and not allow to happen to him. He was tempted to reach out and touch the screen, but it felt too slippery and he wondered if it was a trick of the light. He soon realized, though, that it was real and his classmates were already yelling at him to follow them or just stand there. Frederick turned around and declared that since they were at the academy, running would be completely futile. But he grinned wickedly and said he could try if he was truly afraid. After giving it some thought, Russel decided that since he would be teaching them a lesson immediately, the mission was not as crucial as it had previously seemed. After a few years as a mercenary, he felt he could say with certainty that their games and fun were nothing compared to the death and bloodlust of the monsters he had to battle time and time again. He recognized the children's desire to play. Frederick asked if he had finally made up his mind to approach them while holding a pipe. Russel declared he had guessed correctly and expressed no fear. A classmate referred to him as insane. As soon as he turned to face Russel, he swung his fist once more and remarked that it appeared as though Russel was only dreaming about getting beat up. But instead of letting the other boy's fist get close to him, Russel sidestepped and punched the classmate in the stomach, sending him flying away from his friends. When the other boy realized this, he started to yell at Russel, but was stopped when his own fist struck him in the face. Frederick grinned and saw that 2 guys were already lying on the ground. He claimed that he chose to learn inexpensive fighting techniques because he was ignorant of how to use magic. Frederick threw away his pipe and declared that this was to be expected of an orphan from a family that had perished. He clarified that using magic completely inside the walls was prohibited, but he believed that someone was unaware that using small artifacts was completely legal. He swung at the main character, calling him a mama's boy and yelling for him to die. Russel remained motionless, effortlessly grasping his classmate's fist in his palm. Although Russel surprised Frederick, he also merely twisted his fist the other way in that instant. In front of him, bent over in agony, Frederick dropped to his knees. "Everyone knew that I had been demoted by my own brothers," said Russel. "Not even his family wished for a bomb like him anymore." Russel asserted that he simply insults a weak opponent and is cautious when facing a strong one. Russel's eyes turned into a dragon's when he became enraged. He questioned how a like him could have the audacity to bring up his family. Frederick was terrified and begged Russel to stop, but it was too late because he had already taken a swing. He struck him squarely in the face. He told his bruised classmates to try to be good boys unless they wanted to die as he was leaving the bathroom. Russel strolled outside and leaned against the wall, his hand over his face. He questioned whether punishing his classmates had gone too far. When the same little screen with the text about the low-level magic stone materialized in front of him, he closed his eyes and declared himself tired. He picked up a red stone that landed squarely in his palm, and the device told him he could eat it. Russel was frightened when he saw the jagged object. Though he wasn't interested in thinking about having to swallow it, he believed that it was undoubtedly edible. He believed that rocks were not used as food by even the earliest humans. Still, he took the stone in his mouth, reasoning that it couldn't get any worse. He was notified that the magic stone had been taken in. Like his unanticipated trip back in time, Russel considered the possibility. All of a sudden, Russel felt an odd energy ripping through his body. It turned out that he had acquired mana with the aid of a magic stone, even though he was unaware of what was going on. Russel clenched his chest as he experienced the power overpowering him. His mana circle was growing quickly. His heart seemed to be engulfed in flames. Adequate, Russel started to become more at ease and realized that, happily, his health was starting to improve. He understood that by being successful, he would be able to strengthen and widen his mana veins. The dissolution of his aristocratic family, his expulsion from the academy, and his employment as a subpar hired gun. He sincerely believed that he could now alter his challenging destiny. Russel then proceeded to the professor's office. As he entered, the man motioned for him to take a seat across from him. According to him, Russel wasn't his usual self on that particular day. He questioned the boy about any potential issues or challenges in his life. Russel was taken aback. The instructor continued by saying that he had learned that one of Russell's classmates was mistreating him. Prior to now, Russel believed that Professor Herbert was among the few individuals who still had faith in him. It was something he had always wanted to say, and now he could. He assured the man there was nothing to be concerned about. Additionally, he thanked the professor. Professor Hubert advised him to put his students' welfare first and foremost in his role as a teacher. He still had to discipline the boy, though, because he was sleeping so publicly in class. He warned him that it would not be simple and asked him to compile a synopsis of the enhanced magic material from the book. Telling him that even high school kids couldn't manage such a task, he handed him the book. When Russel saw the blue screen once more, he understood that even a seemingly simple task was part of a mission. The professor smiled at Russel as he turned to face his book and inquired as to whether the assignment was too tough for him. Russel thanked him and denied it. Later, he stretched in his chair while sitting in his room. Russel felt that compared to his expectations, everything was much simpler and easier. Russel never stopped developing the theory even while he was employed as a mercenary as a means of making up for his supposed magical prowess. In this life, there is something equally significant. He needed to master mana control. The organ system in charge of regulating mana circulation in the body includes the vessels that carry it. Mana is absorbed during breathing, moves through the body, and ends up in the heart. A monster attacked Russel and swung at him, but Russel used mana to shoot back at it. Russel used the first mana round, fire, in this situation, which is known as recall. To put it another way, more mana will enter the heart through the vessels the stronger it is. The fact that it spreads out into the outside world more quickly comes next. But the monster kept coming for him even after that, so Russel wanted to use a shield to stop it. But the moment he turned around, the massive scorpion threw him straight into the collapsing column. He just so happened to have relatively weak energy all the time. The wall behind him broke at that very moment, falling in with him. He fell in a strange place, but he wasn't sure if it was because the heavens had finally heard him or if it was just his bad luck. He took a look about. There were 2 grimoires concealed within, but its historical origins are entirely unknown. Even after they blinded him, he reached out to them. They were summoned by means of a magician's body and veins. More light emerged when he held them in his hands. All of these were flashbacks to a different future, and now that he was aware of what was written in these books, he could use them to strengthen his physical form and increase the size of his mana vessels. They also instructed him on how to use them in place of muscle tissue. This implies that your mana vessels get stronger the stronger your body gets. Because their bodies aren't changing as much as a teen's, which is constantly developing, adults experience everything much more keenly. Reassured himself that he would undoubtedly be able to get past the mana vessels narrowing this time. He eventually leaned against a tree and declared that he was done. Furious that this would be sufficient for the day, he furiously wiped his forehead. He had only run half a kilometer when he got the notification that he needed to run 5 kilometers for his training. Disappointed, he peered at the screen and questioned why they had never informed him of this earlier. He was also informed that during the Through the Veins practice, he could finish his mission as many times as he wanted. The length of the run would gradually change based on his progress and level of proficiency. Once he attained a certain level, his mission would completely vanish. Fearing for his life, Russel questioned why the thing was moving so quickly. He promised to run, and he would run now. Russel reasoned that he had been given this chance and that he would not waste it by doing nothing. He went for his run and was hardly moving at all at the end. He told himself that he just needed to run one more push for the day because he had almost completed everything he needed to. With fatigue, Russel realized he could not take one more step as he lay on the ground and stared at the screen. But as Frederick watched him from behind a column, he concluded that Russel was making no progress. Later that day, after sleeping through class, Russel approached the teacher to hand over the assignment. The professor arrived at that conclusion because he couldn't believe that Russel had written it himself. This calls for the use of scholarly resources. He inquired as to Russell's authorship of the report. Standing in front of the desk, Russel declared that he had actually written it himself and that he could prove it with a money guarantee. The teacher believed he was being presumptuous if he was discussing swearing on money. He reasoned that not everyone would speak so openly about something so important. With a smile, he expressed how much he still liked Russell's work. After experiencing yet another flashback to the message, Russel came to the realization that his strength increased with his level of understanding. Russel interrupted the professor, telling him that he could leave, and asked for a favor. The instructor then questioned him about his desire to use the school's academy. According to him, the library ought to serve his needs. The boy answered that he had read all of it on his own. The teacher expressed surprise, inquired as to whether this was accurate, and then commented on how amazing it was. Even if Russel was telling the truth, he said, there were still issues with using the department's library. They must determine whether he is capable of handling it. When Russel saw the assignment messages from Professor Hubert, he became animated and declared that he understood. They were plentiful in number. With a towel around his neck and the realization that he had not anticipated receiving so many assignments, Russel stood by the tree. But, as might be expected, his teacher had high standards. He also told himself that his magic would grow stronger the more he understood the theory. All he had to do was perform at a high level. He considered that this might all be a very challenging test for him as he opened a bottle of water to drink. But now he's killing 2 birds with 1 stone if he receives mana stones for finishing tasks. He looked up to see his classmate Frederick when he heard someone calling his name at that precise moment. The classmate claimed to be obsessed with training, but he had heard that Russel had received a mana load as punishment. He went on to say that he was the reason his friend had to suffer. Russel questioned Frederick's motivation for visiting him and if he was seeking retribution. Frederick chuckled and declared he wasn't looking for retribution. He told Russel to quit making fun of himself since nobody would bother getting even with such a worthless moron. Just stomping him into the ground would be sufficient. Frederick gave him a shoulder push and smiled disgustingly, telling him they would see each other in class. One of his friends asked him as they were leaving if he wasn't going to deal with him at last. However, Frederick stated that he wouldn't perform it at this time because no one was in the vicinity. Russel pondered the lesson. It was a magic combat lesson, a class where pupils are paired with equally strong opponents. He had always been humiliated in that lesson. He was in shock that he had forgotten that it existed and that he had previously been the target of bullying. Russel believed that this lesson required him to be well prepared. He was instructed to proceed to the second round by the notification, and in order to accomplish this, he needed to deepen his comprehension of the topics he already knew. Russel drew notes nonstop, wearing himself out in the process. He consistently surprised Professor Hubert by bringing mountains of papers for his review. After that, he at last got word that his mission was completed and he could get his much-earned reward. In the evening, Russel arranged all of his stones in front of him in his room, believing that this should be sufficient at this point. He extended his hand to touch them, but questioned his ability to support such a large weight. He let out a sigh and concluded that all he could do was depend on the outcomes of his relentless training. Everything was quiet for a moment, but then energy surrounded his body. His entire body radiated, including his eyes. His body felt as though it were on fire. He felt that he had to get on with his journey immediately. He needed to give the extra mana a suitable shape. Gritting his teeth, he focused the mana in his hand, recalling that he had to draw a fresh circle and return it. He was aware that a mistake now would shatter his heart, but he was already decided on something. With his eyes closed, Russel started the ritual that would open the second circle. He promised himself that he would own this power under all circumstances. Because of the quantity of mana, a massive and powerful beam of light appeared through his room's window. He was truly surprised that he had been able to open the second circle and felt as though he had succeeded. He then lost strength and collapsed to the ground. He could see from the message that it had come to him that he had finished the task successfully. Russel told the professor everything he had learned while standing in his office the following day. Professor Hubert exclaimed that it was amazing and that he could not believe Russel had mastered everything. He said he had one last question for him in that scenario. Hubert believed that in addition to being the hardest question he had ever asked, this one would lead him closer to the reality. He questioned Russel about the significance of each of the 4 phases of magic use. Russel gave him a look, but the instructor saw his error. He posed a query that he had just recently talked about with a pupil. He stood up from his chair, telling him that he had another question and to wait. The teacher was taken aback when Russel wanted to give the response. How on earth could he know the correct response? He was informed by Russel that imagination plays a major role. When the teacher questioned him about his reasoning, he said that mana helps it to appear in the real world. People are aware of its 4 phases of use. Understanding comes first and leads to theoretical learning. The second is imagination, which is the ability to picture the material you are learning. The construction that will bring his vision to reality comes next. And lastly, there is the manifestation, which occurs when magic is brought back to life using a formula in the material world. All of these stages are achievable only if you study and put in the required effort. However, no matter how hard you try, effort will not help you at the imaginative stage. What matters most is transcending the mind and using courage to achieve true freedom. Should he visualize fire as an arrow, he will transform into a fire arrow belonging to the second circle of magic. It will instantly change appearance if he starts imagining something else. He might even create something that doesn't even exist in their universe if he doesn't set limits for his imaginative visualization. The professor noticed the light in the boy's hand and compared it to the same hot ice or the shadow that appears when the sun shines. Comprehending the laws of this world is the first step towards mastering them. This is the essence of true magic. Russel glanced at the teacher, who informed him that the student library was too small for him, exactly as he had assumed. A message regarding the task and its reward was sent to Russel. He then proceeded to the library, but first he chose to take a quick look around. He considered the first 4 to be exceptionally big. This place was different from the student library, at least from what he could see of the books on the tables. He sat down to open a book that caught his attention. It was said by a woman who materialized behind him that he was holding an extremely fascinating book. Fearing for his life, Russel spun around, unable to recognize who was speaking to him. Once more, the woman behind him called out to him. The woman was identified by Raymond as Darius Snow White. He arose, bowed his head, and expressed his pleasure at meeting her. He turned to face the woman and introduced himself. She was among the select few who had opened the 8th circle on this planet. Considering that this woman is 80 years old, it takes an amazing amount of mana for her to stay youthful looking. Among the Red Tower faction, her magic tower is the best. She oversees the Fire Tower. Daria expressed her pleasant surprise at the boyfriend's familiarity with her. It seemed to him that he had no idea why she was here. She was just his interlocutor who was fortunate enough to be present, the woman assured him, so he shouldn't be anxious. He was pleasantly surprised when she held out a lollipop in front of him and inquired as to whether it was for him. Daria questioned Raymond as he was walking out of the professor's library, wondering how the student had gotten in there in the first place, candy in his mouth. Without hesitation, Russel told her the truth, stating that Professor Hubert had given him permission to do so. Russel considered it, recalling Professor Hubert, as the woman turned to face him and questioned him about his certainty that he was speaking of the gloomy man. The woman then stated that she understood in that scenario. Ultimately, he was researching an extremely fascinating subject. She remarked that the boy, who had just finished eating the lollipops, had surprisingly pure mana. His body's distribution of energy was very stable and uniform. She considered this to be very unusual. Daria assured him not to worry because she wasn't there to teach him anything, as if reading his thoughts, as he was terrified that she had noticed something. Raymond thanked her once more and bowed his head. She then vanished, leaving him with no other instructions than to put in a lot of effort and develop his skills. As soon as she disappeared, Russel became startled and even flushed. Later, as he was leaving the library, Russel touched the door once more and thought that he had never, ever expected to see Darius Snow White there. Her advice had been innocent, he thought, but was distracted by classmates yelling behind Russell. "Is that Raymond in front of them?" inquired one of them to the other. He heard his classmates say that he had left the professor's library when he turned to face them again. They were unable to comprehend Raymond's perception of him. Frederick was one of the people who talked. He claimed that he was probably just sucking up to the instructors. He continued by saying that he would never be able to accomplish anything using these techniques. Frederick told him to keep trying even though he was leaving. He could not, however, assure Russell that it would result in anything positive. The practical lesson in magic combat started a little later. The first person called had to select his opponent by going out onto the field. In order to select a student of equal strength, the teachers would typically call on a weaker student. Raymond was always called first in his previous life. He heard the other students wagering that since it was evident that Russell had weak veins, he would be called first once more. He needed to get a good grade for the semester, so someone yelled at him to pick him this time. Others yelled at him to and call him instead of someone else. It was time to select the first participant. The teacher yelled at them to be quiet and keep quiet. With everyone around them already knowing who was going to be called, they started to laugh. But much to everyone's amazement, the professor revealed Anton Frederick's name. Nobody knew why he was selected or how it happened. Frederick thanked the professor and grinned when he realized he had been missed. In response, the professor said he was unable to match the assistance he had received from the Merchants Association of the Frederick family. Russell believed that he was aware that this would occur. Frederick asked him why he was still seated in his seat as he glanced up at him. "Please come downstairs," he ordered. Russell folded his arms and cast a serene glance down at him as he yelled his name. Holding a cup of tea, the professor instructed his guest to call her teacher and give him a little more time before coming over. Daria said there was nothing wrong with that as she sat down across from him. She went on to say that it wasn't a huge deal to visit her student. She picked up her cup and informed him that he had given the professor's library access to a boy by the name of Russell. The instructor asked if he had done anything incorrectly after stating with a beaming expression that he had. Daria said no, remarking that it had been a while since she had seen someone so valuable and uncommon. The instructor said she was correct, bowed his head, and folded his arms. He claimed that the boy's mana vessel weakness was a very uncommon illness. The student was taken aback when Daria called him an idiot. He couldn't figure out why. She claimed that the child had already solved his issue a long time ago. Daria told the professor straight that Russell had already advanced to the next round. Upon entering the arena, Russell glanced at the message box. It stated that he could win the magic competition by using the magic department. Russell considered the fact that it was exclusive to the wealthiest magicians. When he got magic stones again, it would be very helpful to have one with him. Frederick interrupted his thoughts by yelling at him to stop standing motionless. He said he could begin pleading for forgiveness if he wished to survive. Russell merely grinned and inquired as to why he needed to beg for anything. His body suddenly erupted in red flames, and he turned to face Frederick. Anton took a step back and realized he had no idea how this magic was possible. He was yelled at by them to take up positions and declare the battle to be underway. Frederick focused his energy and reasoned that a magician with compromised blood vessels could not have a second chance. Frederick threw him into a second mana fire round. Russell produced a shield that stopped the fire and shifted its direction directly in front of his face. The fact that he made a thin shield and used its beveled side to shield himself from the heat was so unbelievable to everyone. The professor who gave Frederick a call was taken aback and believed that Russel Raymond was keeping his skills a secret from everybody. Frederick, who was starting to shake, was obviously upset and did not know how Russell could put up with it. His magic wanes and he cursed. Russell saw an opportunity and decided it was time to take action. With his other hand holding the shield in place, he started to shape it into a fire arrow. He took off the shield and shot the arrow directly at Frederick. When his classmate saw that Russell seemed to be able to make it to the second circle, she was taken aback. As a shield, we crossed his arms and attempted to deflect Russell's blow. Although he did not accomplish it easily, Frederick still referred to Russell as a mediocrity. He was terrified when he looked at him. It was just not possible to understand. By now, Russell had succeeded in making a second arrow. One appeared to be insane and had already shot Frederick with the second arrow. Excitedly glancing toward the arena, the professor believed it to be a double throw, but a man sitting next to him expressed doubt. It didn't appear to be a duplicate. Instead, it appears as though he is throwing two arrows at once because of how quickly these are being made. From behind his shield, Frederick believed that Russell could only shoot these arrows. In this instance, he believed he could solve the issue quickly. In response to the second mana fire round, he opened his armor. Holding the arrow in his hand, Russell simply grinned, assuming this was what he was supposed to happen. Frederick believed he would win if he struck Russell while he was still holding out for his mana to exhaust. But Russell surprised everyone by making a difference with a mere wave of his hand. Frederick was startled to discover that he had thrown another wind arrow at him. Identifying his armor, Russel switched up his weapon. Surrounded by shocked teachers, they questioned one another if it was indeed the Russel. Frederick was now barely able to stay upright and able to withstand the blow from Russel. He didn't get a break, though, as Russel magically materialized in front of him and swung his fist at his stomach. The blow caused Frederick's eyes to turn white. Withdrawing his hand once more, Russel used fire magic to swing and strike Frederick once more. The instructor, who had been pleading with Frederick, started yelling that the competition needed to end right away because this was magic. Professor Hubert questioned why it wasn't magic, though. He instructed them to examine Russel's corpse. Upon closer inspection, the teacher saw that he was wearing his mana-like armor every night. Professor Hubert claimed that although he wasn't sure where he got the idea, he managed to complete everything on his own. Russel delivered a forceful blow to Frederick once more. The young man glanced at his fellow student, who had already created a divot in the earth. Both teachers and students startled out of their seats and stood up. Professor Herbert jolted the teachers out of their reverie by asking them why they were just standing there. The teachers, all of them looking terrified, did not know how this was possible. It was time, he declared, to declare the fight's victor. The instructor declared that Russel Raymond had won at this point. The teacher ran up to Russel while he was still standing in the arena and told him he did a good job and could go. But according to Russel, he wasn't done yet. His meaning was not understood by the teacher. To the surprise of everyone around him, Russel declared that the winner of the fight could select his next opponent if he refused to give up. With a horrible smile, he gestured up at the person who had insulted him and told him to come down to him. Subsequently, Professor Hubert stood holding a cup of tea in his office. Russel had won 14 straight games. Daria had only seen him once, but he could tell she was very intelligent because of her ability to recognize his mana right away. Hubert wondered how Russel could have developed his skills so quickly as he peered into his cup. At that point, all of Russel's magic rewards were to be sent to his magic department, which had been activated. As he was taking a shower, he realized that he had been given an unknown reward. He chose to put his hand in front of a tiny purple portal that he saw. He pulled out a map, and the message instructed him to find the location indicated by a cross. From there, the lights would guide him in the correct direction. There was a warning, though, that he shouldn't begin this task until he had advanced to the third round. This concerned Russel, who considered the third circle. He had made countless attempts to open it prior to his rebirth, but he had never been successful. To be honest, he had no idea where the place was, let alone if he would succeed this time. He made the decision that he might be able to find some information and clues if he used the information from the books in the professor's library. He discovered and tore open a book that described the outer regions of the Enderman Kingdom. The Empire's coast was discussed. His face was tense as he considered the possibility that the book containing the notes on the outer sea held the solution. After reading through mountains of books, he came to the realization that nothing existed anywhere. He became aware that he had been wasting a lot of time in vain. Nevertheless, Russel reasoned that he should now concentrate on figuring out how to advance to the next round. He understood that although the previous time he had managed to put an end to the people who had mistreated him, he was still shunned and despised by others. Professor Hubert interrupted him in the middle of his thought process by placing a hand on his shoulder and inviting him to his office. The professor grinned, and Russel grinned and said, of course he would. As he poured himself a cup of tea, Professor Hubert announced to Russel that summer break was about to start. When he inquired about the boys' plans, Russel answered that he hadn't made any yet. After setting down his tea, the professor asked Raymond if he would like to collaborate with him on a research project. He went on to say that if he performed well, he could write his name next to his. The instructor inquired about Russel's thoughts on the proposal. Upon picking up the book in front of him, Russel's eyes widened even more upon discovering what was inside. Russel held the book close to him and apologized to the teacher, telling him that he had forgotten that he actually had plans for the summer. The teacher gave him a questioning look. Raising an eyebrow, the teacher questioned why he'd just told him he was going to be free. Russel handed the book to him and promised to go to the location. Professor Hubert wondered about the trip to the Maldives after glancing at the cover. In a carriage, Russel was facing the wind, breathing in the clean air, and gazing out the window. Hoping to sate his hunger, he opened the magic box next to him and removed a single man of stone. The man carrying him wiped sweat from his forehead, thinking that the heat outside was just too much to handle. But this heat was coming straight from the carriage itself, which was being consumed by the mana emerging from Russel. The boy closed his eyes and made up his mind to draw a third lap for himself before he reached the Maldives. Professor Herbert was thinking about an odd feeling as he sat in his office at this moment. Though there was probably nothing wrong with it, he wondered why Russel had traveled to the Maldives. He reasoned that she was most likely on vacation there at the moment. Daria believed that the beauty of her hometown had not diminished. She thought to herself as she lay on a sun beneath an umbrella that she couldn't even remember the last time she had taken a break of this kind. Raising her cocktail glass to her lips, she considered how exhausting it must be to present magical studies and defend the Empire, even to teach your own students. She recalled declaring that 9, 6, and 3 held particular significance for sorcerers while in front of a large assembly of people. Those in her immediate vicinity gaped in shock. A person entering the 9th magic circle ends at the first number. The 6th circle test, which must be completed in order to become one of the great magicians, is symbolized by the 2nd. And the start of a person's journey as a self-sufficient and distinct magician is represented by the 3rd circle. Setting down her cocktail, she pondered whether Russell, the child, was doing well. She recalled seeing him in the library. The driver of the carriage carrying Russell declared that the trip was coming to an end when it arrived. He did not understand why the boy did not come out even though he called out to him. Weary, he chose to open the door for himself in order to determine why he was not leaving. Russell was there, and it startled him when he opened the door. Later, the man stuffed himself full, eating as if it were his last meal. He was aware that trying to calm the raging mana had taken too much of his energy. He recalled how the carriage driver had attempted to wake him up out of fear. Nevertheless, Russell carried out his planned action. Thinking only of the 3rd magic circle, he loudly placed his cup down on the table and drank his water. He was reflecting on how, in the months since his rebirth, he had managed to accomplish feats that, in his former life, he could only have imagined. But he was aware that this was insufficient for him. He still had to go farther. He was ready to move on to the current task, having reached the 3rd circle. Glancing at the book, he worriedly realized that he still needed to reach the destination he had set out for. Behind him, he heard someone yelling about an excursion that was being offered for a steep discount that day only. According to legend, Pompeii was once just a regular mountain that turned into a volcano. This only occurred as a result of a unique mythical creature showing up in this region. As he observed the volcano, Russell concluded that the creature's presence had caused the volcano to form. He was aware that the red dragon was the only animal on the planet with the ability to do this. As he watched the storyteller's performance, Russell felt that he would have preferred to be by himself. Before anyone could see him, he swiftly ducked down, moved away from the others, and leaped off the cliff. The group started to wonder where their other hiker had disappeared after a while. Russell was standing close to the waterfall, his feet in the water. He was considering the possibility that his quick advancement through mission completion and the rewards he earned were the reasons he had returned. With a smile on his face and a map in his hand, he peered at the waterfall. He pondered whether the dragon might be connected to it. A tiny golden ball that resembled a real light or spark materialized above the map as he was looking at it. He hurried ahead of him, and it dawned on Russell that the light guiding him was the same one that was meant to direct him. Swiftly moving over the waterfall, the spark trailed behind him. Grinning, Russell realized that he needed to follow this light. He ignored the water and used his previously learned air arrow to focus his energy and mana, making it easy for him to enter the cave behind the waterfall. Standing on an outcropping stone, he speculated that a lava cave might be nearby. He was therefore not shocked that so few people were aware of this location. He recalled that he had been told not to come here until he had completed the 3rd circle of mana, but he had not, for some reason, encountered any monsters or beasts in this area. He took a step forward and peered at a column. He placed his hand on it and pondered the object's age. He turned back toward the darkness due to an unexplained sound. He continued to walk, and although someone in the shadows assumed he was observing him and speculating about his next move, he made the decision to go there. When he realized that he had truly forgotten his time as a mercenary, Russell became aware that no situation involving monsters is safe. It simply indicates that he has moved into the domain of a formidable foe. He was staring at a Komodo lizard directly in front of his face before he could turn around. It parted its lips to snap at the taken aback Russell. A portion of the room was destroyed when one of the columns was struck by its attack and flew in different directions. In self-defense, Russell surrounded himself with mana and leaped upward. He scowled as he realized that 2 powerful and sizable mercenary teams would be needed to defeat this formidable creature. All he could do at this point was to leave the area as quickly as possible. He concentrated mana in his hand to create a second round lightning arrow as he stood directly in front of the creature. At the same time, the lizard and Russell started to fight, and Russell shot his arrow right at the lizard's head. The creature erupted from the inside at that precise moment. Russell understood that his strike would only be able to slightly slow it down. He had to get out of there as soon as possible, so he started running. But the gate he was heading toward closed right in front of him, and he felt he needed to use his mana to prove it in order to pass through. A monster was already chasing Russell, who was furious and unable to comprehend what was happening to him. Turning around, he decided that he would have to fight the battle regardless of whether or not he could flee. He looked menacing and said, "I'll just deal with it," his eyes darkening. He touched his hand, causing it to become engulfed in flames and forming a second circle of mana fire pillar. The lizard gave him a look before stopping for no apparent reason. To Russell's confusion, it just stopped moving and he became ready to attack. The guy in front of the lizard was about to fall in front of him when it leaped above him. Russell was oblivious to the circumstances, but right then and there, the door behind him opened. A voice informed him that he had earned the right to proceed. I started to pour light out of the stone on the door, lighting up Russel entirely. He rubbed his eyes, blinded by the bright light, when it vanished. He didn't know where he was when he opened his eyes and felt the ice beneath him. It was he who could see the enormous statues of the guards before him. He looked around, thinking that he had been in the cave only a moment ago, so it had to be some sort of teleportation magic. He noticed a red light behind him as he stood up. When Russel turned around, he noticed something enormous and peculiar behind him. A message informed him that in order to finish the task, he needed to use fire to destroy every ice golem. He quickly glanced at the guards surrounding him, not sure who they were. They had barely started moving when he started to realize what was happening. These creatures' red glowing eyes bewildered Russel, who was baffled as to how he could take them all out at once. He yelled that such tasks were beyond his capabilities and turned on the fire power on his arm. He sent a wave of fire at one of the golems. The guy realized that he needed to destroy the golem's core from the inside since the entire thing was engulfed in flames. But the person he attacked merely managed a minor scrape and continued to stand there as if nothing had happened. Gritting his teeth, Russel pondered the likely temperature of this ice. He concluded that he could attempt to harness the power of the wind since fire would not work on them. He was terrified when he realized he couldn't utter the spell even though he wanted to conjure wind in his palm. As the golem charged towards him, Russel extended his hand in a fruitless attempt to summon at least lightning. The golem launched an ice attack on him at this point, but he was lucky to parry the blow. Already injured, Russel recalled that the messages had stated he needed to use the power of fire to defeat these creatures. The golem swung its arm at him once more at that precise moment, and Russel realized he would be limited to using fire magic alone. He stumbled over a rock and got stuck against the wall while the golem started to advance, getting closer and closer to him. He held his sore shoulder, but he considered this to be a questionable form of amusement. He used his hand to dab at his forehead before turning on a two-circle fire mana pillar. He turned to face the terrifying red eyes of the ice golems that loomed over him. Even though his fire was all over him, he believed he could manage by himself. He used his fire to attack the golem, but when nothing happened, he quickly tried again while keeping a watchful eye on his adversary. He believed there were two more monsters in front of him as he stood there clutching his burned arm. He understood that before he could kill them all, his mana would run out at this rate. Though concerned, he considered how he might win in a different way. As the golem struck the spot where he had been standing a moment earlier, Russel made the decision to flee. He realized that he had to focus all of his power in one area if he was going to be able to penetrate each of these creatures' armor. He concluded that for now, focusing would be the best course of action. He reasoned that in order to cast a spell, he would first need to get away from them. He made the decision to use his fire arrow and a strengthening formula after that. All of that would come together for him when he called forth the double fire pillar. In front of him, Russel noticed 5 magical fire arrows. They were all converted into a formula for compression. With all his might, he squeezed the 5 arrows in his hands. He took a step toward the golem and swung his massive arm. Russel pleaded with the arrows to get smaller more quickly. His only opportunity was now. The golem that had swung at him suddenly collapsed in front of the man, leaving a massive hole where his core had been. This was followed by an incredibly powerful explosion. As he moved away from him, Russel's eyes once more took on a dragon's appearance. This was the turning point in the creation of Russel's fire spear. He turned to face the golems. He was informed that his comprehension of fire magic had significantly improved. He felt the spear's power as he held it in his hands. Russel perceived this power as having characteristics similar to those of the 5th circle of mana. He became aware that a great deal of his mana was needed even just to hold this spear in his hands. He made the decision to strike first in this instance and move quickly to the ice golems that were still alive at the same time. Even when they swung at him again, he did not falter or show fear. He attacked each one of them one by one as he darted quickly from one to the other. With his magic spear in his hands, Russel hung in midair. After he hit the ground again, he counted how many more monsters he had to defeat. He attacked them once more, shattering their centers. There remained 2 golems. He gave one a swing in the hopes of eliminating them as soon as he had the others. Russel used his spear to cut one of them in half. He paused for a moment, believing that there was still one adversary. With barely enough time to turn around, the last monster attacked the man. While in agony, Russel realized that he would have undoubtedly died if he hadn't used his spear to deflect the blow. Upon examining his hands, he became aware of how little mana remained in him. He resolved that this would be his final throw as he got to his feet. Russel was pleading with all the gods for this spear to fly one last time, even though the golem was just a few meters away. He knew then that he had finally prevailed because he had punctured a hole in the last monster. He was so tired that his eyes started to close, and within a few seconds he passed out in the middle of the hallway. He was notified that his task was finished and he was about to receive his reward. A fiery object that was one of them was the king's forgotten horn. As it turned out, it was the same large red object that had been hanging in the hallway where he had battled the golems. The horn was lowered as the chains holding it loosened. It erupted into a ferocious flame and glowed, illuminating the still lying unconscious Russel. The notice stated that in order to get the task's reward, they had started to explore the forgotten king's memories. Russel opened his eyes, fatigued, but oblivious to his surroundings. In the middle of what appeared to be an empty space, he was bound by golden chains. He was notified that he had succeeded in submerging himself in recollections and was given his just reward. Since the horn was meant to be that of a fire dragon, Russel couldn't understand why it was the king's horn. He questioned whether it qualified as a reward at all. He felt as though he would be tortured in this place. He is a man who has achieved the thoughts of a sacred being and passed the fire test. In addition to being terrified, Russel had no idea why he was hearing this. He felt as though his head would burst. The voice declared that it was giving it to him as the same horn materialized in front of him. Darius Snow White sent a message to Russel. He had to assist her in taking down a ship that was harboring pirates engaged in human trafficking. Although Daria claimed to have heard of it previously, it's outright forbidden in Andaman. Because of this, ships carrying human traffickers avoid calling at their port. Sadly, some nevertheless make a valiant effort to halt close to the Maldive. Daria said, "Of course, I could have handled it myself and dealt with them," as she was boarding the boat. However, the goal of this mission was to seize control of the ship and release every prisoner. That would necessitate a careful and comprehensive plan. Then, according to Russel, they ought to stage an assault. Daria turned to face him, telling him that it was coming together quite rapidly. With his head turned to the side, Russel considered the possibility that hundreds of mages, even those without shoes, would rush to his aid if the fire tower's master asked for it. However, she persuades him that his assistance is required, so it is obvious that this is a test for him. Daria turned to Russel when they were getting close to the pirate ship, telling him that although what was going to happen on this ship might seem like too much for him, a protector's path is never easy or gentle. It's just one of their magical responsibilities. Declaring that she would divert the pirates and that Russel would have to save the kidnapped individuals, the woman leaped off the side of their boat. As he watched her go, Russel considered the path a defender might take. Daria believed that this height would be sufficient for her as she climbed above the pirate ship. Fire erupted all around her as white light flashed in her eyes. She yelled at Russel to get moving. Shouting that they were under attack, the pirates attempted to defend themselves from Daria. No arrow could even make it to her from the crossbows and sabers they aimed at her. The pirates were perplexed and unsure of their next move. Daria glared at them, calling them for believing it would be wise to hide in her hometown. Petals from the fiery rose she was holding broke off and started to fall to the deck. She declared that she would now be able to gauge their true courage and strength. The pirates were startled when the fire reached the ship and instantly caught fire. They began yelling at her, demanding to know why she had fired at them. When the pirates attempted to get around it, the flames clung to their legs and started to burn them alive. The ship was rapidly overrun by fire as it was Daria's signature Snow White trick. A dwarf created a wood fire. With the pirates in a state of panic and utter confusion, Russel hurried to the ship's deck. He saw that the attack was not a problem and that the pirates were yelling at one another to move. He turned to face them and saw that it was Daria's magic that had leveled the entire castle. A pirate attempted to put out the fire, but was unsuccessful, and the flames quickly engulfed him. Russel was fortunate to witness this power firsthand. Everything erupted in a matter of seconds. The fire just instantly changed into something entirely different. But he understood that this was no time to be taken aback. He needed to save as many people as he could and move quickly. The individuals inside the cages could also hear the odd noise that the man watching the detainees heard. They reasoned that since they had been rescued at last, the Navy must have been attacking the pirates. But the pirate who was watching over them slashed his saber through the cages and declared that they would never be able to escape this place, no matter what. He asked the terrified individuals trembling in front of the cage if they understood. Russel suddenly materialized behind him, seized him by the neck, and unleashed a barrage of lightning magic. The pirate literally collapsed to the ground like a fried chicken as the electric charge went through his entire body. Pulling his hand away, Russel realized that nobody had gone upstairs as he had anticipated. Russel was asked if he had come to save the people in the cages. He grinned and told them after giving them a quick glance. But he also said that while the pirates were away, it would be safer for them to remain inside. The prisoners bowed down to him and prayed, declaring that God had heard their pleas at last. Russel pondered the number of individuals these pirates had jammed into the cramped chamber. With a start, he looked into one of the cages and saw a child chained inside. He declared that the pirates were nothing more than the underclass out of rage at what he saw. The room's door opened at that precise moment, letting the pirates in as they saw Russel standing close to the body of the guard. After swinging at him, a pirate yelled that they needed to apprehend him. Though they were obviously outnumbered, the other pirates moved toward him as well. Russel, however, was not defeated and once more used the power of lightning, promising to bring them all in. The pirates all collapsed to the ground as he encircled them in a chain of lightning from the second circle of mana. Speaking still, one of the pirates claimed that the man was a magician. He said as much as he could when Russel interrupted and struck him with lightning once more, saying that if the captain arrived, he entered one of the extremely dark cells, but he had no idea who was inside. A voice asked if Russel was a fire tower mage emerging from the shadows. The boy formed a ball of light that filled the cell with light. He noticed the elves seated in the room. Asking if he had guessed correctly, one of them got to his feet. Given the emblem that Daria had given him, Russel surmised that's why they believed that. He answered honestly that he hadn't and that he hadn't become a member of the Fire Tower Society yet. The elf told him it made no difference and to open the door as soon as he could. Russel looked at him and thought that he wanted to let them out, of course, but this superior tone pissed him off. He gave the elf another glance and concluded that the haughty expression in his eyes proved that he was an elf. He heard a voice in the elf telling him he should be more mindful of his manners. The female elf who added that advice said. The elf referred to her as Ilo. Raising her hand to clasp an elf's, she declared that Russel was no typical person. She went up to the boy and remarked that he had a manner as pure as sunlight. She claimed to be able to smell souls on Russel after giving him a quick glance. The elf asked Ilo what she meant by saying that he was not an ordinary person. The girl gave the boy a close look before repeating that his oddity was the shower odor. Russel was unable to interpret what this meant. The elves all gave him a strange look and remarked that they couldn't figure out how someone could smell like a shower. Incredulous, Russel smelled himself and continued to have no idea what they were discussing. The superior elf stood next to Ilo at that precise moment, addressing him once more and asking Russel to gently lead them out of the building. The elves all bowed to him and said they were sending up prayers for him. Russel was taken aback by how drastically the elves, who had previously refused to compromise their strong self-esteem, changed at the girl's simple utterance. Taking one look at her, he wondered if she was really the head elf or if there was some other possibility. Russel picked up the cage lock and started working fire magic on it. Ilo questioned him at this point about whether he had vanquished every boss and pirate on his ship. Surprised, he turned to face her and asked, "What bosses are you talking about?" She claimed that despite her soldiers' considerable magical prowess, they surpassed them in strength. A man appeared in the hallway at that very moment, glanced around, and realized the circumstances surrounding the cells. He then smiled. The pirates were unsuccessfully attempting to put out the fire on the deck at that precise moment. The captain of the pirates, who was observing with curiosity, thought the firefight was pretty adorable. He slashed at the fire in front of him after taking his large sword out from behind his back. His red magic armor already covering him, he leaped to join the other pirates. He questioned the pirates, asking them why they were already wary of such minor and inconsequential attacks. "It's their captain," yelled one of the pirates. They began yelling at Daria that she would not survive now that the captain had shown up and that they would simply tear her to pieces. Daria remarked, grinning, "This is starting to get interesting." She descended to the deck and confronted the pirates directly. As they got closer, she gave them a close inspection. The captain gave her a sidelong glance and inquired as to why she was getting closer to him. Daria retorted that she understood he was in charge. He yelled that it was accurate and that his name was Don Cook. He was the ship's captain. Daria saw that he exuded an aura of protection. She questioned him about his past as a knight, and if so, why he was in this place. The captain burst out laughing uncontrollably, claiming that a knight's honor would not buy him food or cover his taxes. He gave her a look and informed her that the Cook brothers were profiting from the trade in ways she could never have imagined. Daria considered his remarks regarding the brothers. The captain waited patiently and moved swiftly to swing his sword in Daria's direction. He attempted to assault her, but Daria remained motionless. At this point, the attack started to fracture the wall beneath Russel. At the sound, he snapped to his senses and realized it was dangerous. He was standing in front of a cage that had a shield activated when the wall fell. Unaware of what was happening to him, he found himself pinned to the bars. Upon looking down at the ground, Russel noticed the broken spears. He was told he had protected them by an armored man who suddenly materialized in front of him. He claimed to be a magician as he reached for his weapon and walked up to Russel. Though he didn't know what the aura meant, Russel assumed he was a knight. It was communicated to Russel that this was his first encounter with a swordsman. Though it's far from easy, he must prevail at all costs. Ilo's voice could be heard behind Russel, cautioning her protector. She said that this man was the pirate ship's vice captain. The man then stated that even though Russel is a magician, he is still a young boy. He claimed that instead of killing the pirates, Russel had only managed to knock them out as he kicked the body of one of them. He went on to say that the only way these people could truly lose the war would be if they died. With a sword raised, he threatened to demonstrate to Russel how they actually operate. Not to be confused, Russel felt an aura of red light appear around him at once. He believed that since anything could catch fire at any time, using fire magic was too risky, so he used lightning magic to cover his hand. he struck the third man with a lightning strike on a circle. Is he really going to use lightning to defeat the swordsman? The knight inquired. Although he blocked his blow, he claimed that his head appeared to be functioning somewhat. To his surprise, he began approaching Russel in spite of these remarks. The man made another attempt to attack, but soon came to the conclusion that his attacks were ineffective against him. The man claimed that such a defeat was not possible for him. He made his way toward Russel while dodging lightning and raising his sword in front of him. It dawned on Russel that this was his method of cutting off the electricity. Immediately, the knight swung at Russel's shield. The knight continued to push against the barrier separating them even though the shield shielded him. At one point, Russel noticed that his shield was cracking directly in front of him, but the knight's sword had already hurt him in a split second. The fight on deck between the captain and Daria was still going on at this point. He believed he had killed Daria, but the woman was gone and there were just lights in her place. The captain was perplexed and could not figure out why this was happening. Daria suddenly materialized in front of him. He gave her a quick glance and remarked that she had a pretty decent jumping gait. Daria asked if she could ask him a question while glancing at him. Was his brother a knight too? She inquired. The captain acknowledged that it was accurate, but he also mentioned that his brother was still somewhat less strong than him. Daria averted her gaze and answered that, yes, everything was all right. She said that she had been worrying for nothing after stabbing her weapon into the tree and everything surrounding her erupted into flames. As a result of Daria's magic spell, strange creatures started to emerge from the fire. The captain declared that it was just another fire gnome while attempting to cut the creature open once more. Daria countered that it wasn't entirely accurate because she had made him feel unique this time. The meaning of that was lost on the captain, but in that instant the fire gnome he had just split into two identical ones split apart. He understood that because they were splitting, the more he cut them, the more they would grow. It was the Hellfire Dwarf Daria Sonya White's spell. She turned to face the pirates, who were at a loss for what to do. The captain started to worry and fuss because he had no idea how to get out of this predicament. Although the pirate recognized Daria as the witch from the Tower of Fire, he was perplexed as to why she was in this location. Russel was fighting with the vice captain of the pirates at that moment. After the knight's sword vanished, he was left stunned. He was even more shocked to see that the boys had managed to fend off his attack when he turned to face Russel. Though he was certain that this blow should have severed the man in half, he could still recall the moment when he broke the shield. In an attempt to enhance his physical prowess, it appeared that Russel had magically coated himself. But he reasoned that, at this point, this guy was just a cornered rat, so it didn't really matter. Excited, Ilo turned to face her defender. As he stood there gasping for air, Russel recalled that he had previously met the knight. That knight had slaughtered a whole company of mercenaries in a previous life simply because one of them had knocked him over by mistake with his shoulder. Russel recalled that a mage was the only one who could control his rage. Strangely enough, the reason for this was that he could cast one armor. When the vice captain attacked him, Russel kept this in mind and acted accordingly. To prevent the sword from striking him, he layered one piece of armor on top of the other. Although the knight was unaware of how Russel deflected his attack once more, the man had already conjured up a 2-mana circle wind arrow and was firing it directly at him. With a clot of his blood in his mouth, the knight flew back. But at that precise moment, Russel leaned as well against the wall. He reasoned that his blood loss was probably excessive. Nevertheless, he unlocked the cage and allowed the elves to escape. Ilo and the other elves expressed gratitude to their guardian. Russel advised them to follow him if at all possible. But just then, he heard a voice behind him. A knight stood up from his fallen position. He declared that he should have chopped off Russel's head right away, his eyes red with rage. Russel turned to face him, perplexed as to why he was getting to his feet after striking him with his blow. He covered the elves and gave them orders to ascend the stairs while carrying the other inmates. Outraged, one of the elves questioned why he was even letting himself give the order to release people, but Ilo consented to do so right away. The vice captain of the pirates chuckled and remarked, "It looks like this guy even has time to say." He simultaneously moved under the shield and swung his sword at Russel once more. He should put his own needs first, the pirate advised. The pirate continued without taking his sword from the boy's shield. He vowed to deny Russel any opportunity to retaliate. With an evil smile, he proceeded to break through the boy's shield. All that was on Russel's mind while he was pressing on it was the elves he'd told to flee. All he could do was put up with it. Humans were being set free by the elves. He was going to have to wait a bit longer. Just until everyone left, there was not much left. One of the elves shouted to Russel that they were safe. He was advised not to believe that this fact would bring about any changes by the former knight. But just as Russel was saying, of course it changes everything, everything around him started to catch fire. The vice captain was taken aback to see Russel standing before him, his eyes the black and yellow of a dragon. He declared that he would destroy him. Even though everything around him was on fire, Russel kept his shield over his head and never put down his sword. As for the knight himself, he understood nothing. At last, he jumped back from him as the guy in front of him drastically changed his appearance. Around Russell, the atmosphere shifted. The knight grinned, thinking he was at last ready to take a life. He made the decision to charge the boy once more and threatened to pierce him with his shield. But that's when Russell unleashed his brand new spell, the Fire Spear. It dawned on the already swinging knight that it was a fire harpoon. But he waved the idea away without further ado. It was definitely not a harpoon. It was obvious that Russell had something at least a few levels higher in his possession. Darius and the captain of the ship were still at odds at this point. The pirate noticed that as he killed more gnomes, more of them appeared in his immediate vicinity. He wouldn't be able to dismiss it with ease. He considered what his brother was doing at that precise moment. The captain understood that unless his brother had appeared, he could not have dealt with a witch. He cut the lights down once more to throw them back as the lights rushed at him once more. He figured he would be alright if he could endure this assault for a little while longer. But that's when the board swelled and cracked beneath his feet, lighting up at that precise moment. The captain was killed as a massive and powerful pillar of fire and mana erupted from it. Daria was amazed by everything that was happening and believed that the prisoner, who had been freed, was just playing around. The elves went on deck and assisted passengers in disembarking. Below, beneath the splintered planks, stood Russell, who had fulfilled his duty. The message he received while unconscious stated that he had earned his reward for finishing the mission. The remaining pirates in the boat started shouting outside the ship that they needed to surround it because the captain was down. The order went out for all the guard boats to assemble nearby. It simply chuckled in reaction to this. She raised all of her air lights and fired them into the boats surrounding the ship after saying that she should give this test some serious thought. Later, when Russell awoke, Ilo was using her magic to treat him. Startled, he asked her what had become of him. Ilo instructed her savior to stay put. She explained that his treatment would take some time because her mana had not yet fully healed. Darius declared, behind him, that he was a truly good man at that precise moment because he had defeated the captain by himself. With a smile, Darius declared that he had successfully overcome the captain, who was now restrained to the pole alongside his sibling. Additionally, Ilo informed Russell that she would now owe him her life. She went on to say that although she wouldn't be able to pay him back right away, Ayana Ilo, the leader of the White Ash tribe, had promised him that she would eventually repay him out of respect for her forefathers and the tribe's founders. Putting his hand on his chest, Russell grinned and said he had done what any defender would have done. With a gentle turn, Daria asked Ilo to remember the Tower of Fire. The other elves materialized in front of them, informing Daria that they had followed up with the other miscreants. Daria turned back to Ilo after praising the two elves. They were very kind, she said. Russell observed that these elves were acting considerably differently now than they had in the past. He asked Ilo, glancing at her, what she had been discussing in the cell earlier. If he was inquiring about her statement regarding the shower's odor, Ilo responded. Daria noticed this and turned to face them right away. According to Russell, it is true. If his blood was combined with dragon blood, Ilo questioned. This question surprised Russell. Ilo claimed that she actually carried green dragon blood, which is a type of dragon blood. Although this is merely a small portion of the ocean, even a small amount can draw spirits. Ilo wanted to know if he shared her blood because she claimed to have smelled a similar odor from him. Thought that if he was a half-breed, that would explain why he was growing stronger so quickly. Daria seemed to understand. She came to the conclusion that Russell might be the one to rock Andaman's entire kingdom. No, the entire world, not just that one. The elves were already tucked under their cloaks when they arrived at the port and the prisoners were being removed from the ship. Daria turned to Lady Ilo at this point and inquired as to whether she intended to remain hidden until her mana was completely restored. Ilo assured her that was accurate. According to Daria, her estate was in close proximity. She went on to say that they could stay and assist with Russell's training if it didn't bother them. Now perplexed, the man inquired about the nature of the training. He had not been informed about it. Ilo stated that she would consent if this was the means by which she could pay him back. Putting her hand on Russell's shoulder, Daria asked if he wanted to come here for training. He grinned and said, "Of course I would love to do that. This training is unique and comes from a fire tower master." In that scenario, Daria advised them to proceed in the direction she indicated, and the carriage would arrive shortly. Russell questioned Daria about whether she would be alright with this semester commencing so soon. Daria assured him that everything would be handled by his Professor Hubert, so he didn't need to worry. Already, Russell was pitying his professor. Later, after being transported by multiple carriages to Lady Daria's estate, they were all heading in that direction. Russell opted to explore his surroundings after exiting the carriage. The witch herself arrived at the gate and said that they all felt at home, leaving him astonished by the size of Daria's castle. Ilo and Russell went after Daria, and then all the other elves. Ilo commented on how lovely the location was and expressed her gratitude to Daria for having taken them in. Looking around again, Russell saw that this was a familiar place. It occurred to him that he and his parents had visited there once. He turned to face Daria, who was now walking in front of him. At this point, she turned to face the boy, who inquired as to whether the estate had once belonged to someone else besides her. According to Daria, he was giving the impression that she had taken it from someone else. Russel said he didn't mean it that way and apologized, but she informed a startled Russel that he was correct. She had purchased the property a few years prior. It had been owned by a trade association. Russel believed that the location, which had once belonged to his own family, was exactly as he had imagined. He smiled and said that he didn't have any more questions when Daria asked. Russel pondered how he'd heard the property had been sold for a very low price following the dissolution of his family. He didn't even think he would be able to return to this location as he approached the entrance. Ilo met with the estate's owner a week later. Ilo reported hearing Daria yelling for her. With a cup of tea in hand, Daria responded that it appeared that Ilo had successfully recovered her mana. Ilo grinned and credited Daria for everything. Placing her cup on the table, the Tower Master announced that she wished to discuss the matter she had previously brought up. She requested that Ilo assist Russel in his training. When she mentioned training, Ilo inquired as to whether she meant to use spirits. Daria asserted her accuracy. Ilo inquired as to Russel's location. Daria gave her a quick glance before retorting that she had instructed the boy to take care of himself. Russel was jumping off the cliff into the water at that moment, but he would swim out and realize he had failed once more when he fell back under. Daria had questioned him earlier at the same location about what he meant when he said that he was the knight's ace in the battle on the pirate ship. More specifically, what he needed. It was distance, according to Russel. Daria complimented him on his attention to detail and stated that in a mage battle, distance was crucial. She turned to face Russel and asked him to keep a close eye on her. She entered the chasm and told him to consider the shift in space. But she didn't trip and fall. Something caught fire beneath her, keeping her from falling. Russel came to understand that space is bent by magic. It was referred to as a flash. Daria then instructed Russel to try moving himself with the same flash. She also said that he would find this to be a very helpful skill in the future. He was being tutored by someone at the time, who advised him to learn how to use this flash and promised to reward him for it. Even though Russel was worn out, he persisted. He scaled the cliff once more. He understood that the lap he was on had nothing to do with the flash. This is the type of magic that requires only an understanding of its logical operation to be mastered. It had already started to get yellow all around him where he stood on a cliff. He attempted to advance once more, but stumbled and fell helplessly. Even though the sun had already started to set, Russel kept going up the same cliff. He was starting to question whether this was a test of his stamina rather than his flash. Russel closed his eyes tightly and instructed himself to focus on the area that was getting smaller. He stepped forward once more, and under it there was a tiny fire this time. When he saw the same fire beneath his other foot, he made the decision to continue. However, Daria reappeared behind him at that precise moment. With a smile that was already fading but was still filled with flames, Russel glanced at her. She simply glanced at him while grinning. However, that was the exact moment when Russel realized he was falling again, and his face twisted. Subsequently, Daria smiled once more and informed him that he would now be learning how to make contracts with souls. Ilo was standing beside them when Daria offered to assist Russel with this. Ilo put her hand on his chest and expressed her gratitude for being able to support her protector, Russel. The boy thanked the elf and bowed to her. Later, Ilo was standing next to Russel, who was sitting on the ground close to a fire. She instructed Russel to gently close his eyes. Following that, she instructed him to visualize anything related to the fire. Daria stood back and observed the two of them. Ilo went on to speak, advising Russel to consider talking flowers or the dawnlight. Everything would work, literally. At one point, Russel's body appeared to be completely covered in fire. Ilo stared at him, her eyes so full of pure mana that she was shocked. She had never seen anyone with such an abundance of it. Ilo assured Russel that she would navigate his subconscious on his behalf. Ilo was really holding Russel's hand in his subconscious. It appeared as though she was in space. The door that leads to the spirits is always open, even though most people are unaware of it. They are accessible to everyone, whether they are elves or humans. They were all produced by the same force of nature. The door to the world of spirits opens when all of this is combined. Daria was taken aback by her emotions. She couldn't figure out why his heart was beating so quietly. Ilo experienced a powerful sensation in his subconscious that suggested he was just furious. She saw a picture of a man being killed with words of hatred. Ilo felt stressed and scared by this, and she wanted to cover her ears. She removed her hands from her ears, not knowing what kind of feeling her heart was experiencing. In front of the large, bright door, she stood. Currently, Russel was shedding a few tiny tears. Ilo kept the real Russel by the shoulders, but there was a noticeable tension in him. They were suddenly encircled by Russel's mono light. Daria was taken aback and unsure of what action to take. She moved swiftly in the direction of Ilo and Russel, who were still glowing from the strong force. Later, Daria's face was the first thing Russel saw when he awoke. He simply called her name when she asked him if he was awake. He asked her what had happened earlier as he got up, holding his clearly hurting head. He remembered how his mana had just sort of exploded. Russel turned to face Lady Ilo as she entered the room. She had bandages on her arm, which he saw right away. She hurried to reassure the boy that everything was okay with her. Russel's face darkened the moment he accepted that he was undoubtedly to blame. He covered his face with his hands and expressed his extreme shame. Russel made the decision to stand by the fountain while strolling around the yard in the evening. Daria turned to face Lady Ilo while keeping an eye on him through the window. What exactly had happened, she asked her. Ilo started her story by describing how terrifying it was. They managed to enter the spirit realm while she was in Russel's subconscious, but they were stopped short of entering it due to an unanticipated emotional outburst. Daria pondered what emotions and sentiments might have triggered this. Ilo described it as being akin to a fit of rage. She added that it felt even more like sadness as she cast a downward glance. She couldn't help but wonder what this guy was concealing from them because it was so profound. Later that day, as Russel was strolling around the yard, Daria came up to him. Ilo announced that a new training session for him was about to start as he stood behind her. Daria informed him that the task was cleaning, but Russel bowed his head and said he would follow her instructions. Ilo cast a startled glance at her. Daria merely grinned and offered to assist the staff in cleaning the mansion for a week. Russel questioned what kind of general cleaning was involved for an entire estate. She mentioned that she and Lady Ilo would be visiting the capital during that time as they stood by the carriage. Ilo bowed and said they would see each other in a week. Russel wanted them to look after one another. Daria made it clear that he wasn't being punished in any way. Russel nodded and decided to try cleaning the house as fast as possible before practicing the flash once more. But Daria quickly crushed all of his hopes when she declared that she would not permit him to use magic for the remainder of the week, under any circumstances. After that, Russel became astonished and upset. A while later, he was standing in the hallway holding a mop. With great enthusiasm, he started mopping the floor and declared that if magic was forbidden this week, he could teach himself to clean. He took the mop in his hand and ran forward. His happiness was short-lived, though, as he stumbled on the damp floor and fell backward, tipping over a vase. The vase broke next to him while he slept on his back. He was asked by a woman who appeared behind him who was cleaning so quickly. She turned to face Russel, telling him it was Daria's favorite vase. He recalled that Daria had informed him that he had to obey her maid's instructions for the cleaning to proceed smoothly. He then encountered a woman dressed as a mage and sporting spectacles, and now it was her, with an intimidating expression, standing directly behind him. Russel examined the vase and offered a heartfelt apology. The maid claimed to have learned that he would not be permitted to use magic for a week. She offered him a napkin and requested that he clean only the areas she instructed him to clean going forward. Later, she stood behind him and fixed all of his errors while he was cleaning the vases. She would point out areas where he hadn't mopped enough or hadn't done so yet while he was cleaning the floor. Russel appeared to be having a lot of fun while cleaning. He eventually sat down on the floor, exhausted. Gazing downward, Russel let out a gasp of breath. He felt as though the maid was encircling him. He started to believe that this was some sort of strength or endurance test. A woman informed him that it was time for lunch as she passed by at that precise moment. She requested that Russel follow her. He started to respond that he would eat later, but the woman turned to face him sharply and reiterated that he needed to follow her right away. With hesitation, Russel said he would. Subsequently, he was seated at a table alongside every member of Daria's estate staff. Upon surveying the area, Russel saw that a sizable number of people were employed there. Russel introduced himself to the man after asking him his name and finding out that he was a kind elderly man. When the man learned the boy's last name was Raymond, he became shocked. Russel feared the man might be acquainted with him. He was shocked to learn, though, that the man thought he was extremely attractive. He highlighted his dark hair and crimson eyes. Agreeing, one of the maids exclaimed that it was simply amazing. A second man stepped up to him, frightening Russel. He appeared fit, as if he was working out, the man who grabbed him by the shoulders remarked. Everyone laughed when he laughed and gave Russel a quick pat on the back. Russel grinned, but on the inside he was confused about what was going on. This would only take up a week of his time, he told himself in his head. He hoped it was merely an assessment, some sort of check. Afterwards, as night fell, Russel and the other laborers were hauling a big log of wood. Weary, Russel considered how much faster he could have completed the task if he had been able to use magic at that point. Afterwards, he and the other employees of Lady Daria took a seat at the table to relax after concluding their work. They declared they had done a good job and clinked beer glasses. Russel began sipping from his glass as well, drawing the attention of a man who had earlier approached him. He surprised Russel by giving him a slap on the back, and he spat it out. The man asked him why he had hit him as he turned to face him. He was too young to drink, the man said, giving him a disbelieving look. He would lose all of his muscles if he drank. Upon placing his glass down on the table, Russel came to the realization that he was only a student. He was mistaken for his former self. The older man who had earlier complimented him on his appearance said there was no need for concern and gave Russell another beer. He assured me that adults would teach him the proper way to drink. With that kind of a view, he said, it would be a sin for anyone to abstain from alcohol if they had the chance. Looking to the side, a breathtaking sunset erupted in front of them, bathing everything in a warm yellow glow. Turning around, they all heard a woman's voice warn them that things would not go well otherwise. The head maid was the one bringing the food, and she warned them not to drink or eat anything. The other men started praising the new family member and toasting to him as soon as she placed the food on the table. The woman turned to face Russell, who was grinning and enjoying a glass of beer while seated. The boy burst into laughter when the man next to him, grinning, put his hand on his shoulder. Later, under her supervision, Russell helped wash and carry dishes in the kitchen and cleaned the roof. He did nothing but lie on the ground in the estate's yard and rest in the evening. He shared his meals with Lady Daria's staff and assisted with the flower arrangements. He was thinking about how this week would end the next day as he sat on the edge of the fountain. But he didn't know why he was feeling that way. The maid approached him as he was considering it and remarked that he appeared to really enjoy the location. As soon as he saw her, Russell got up and greeted her. After adjusting her glasses, the woman asked him how many times he had greeted her that day. He didn't even notice it, so Russell laughed awkwardly and asked if he really did it that often. The maid inquired as to why he found this place to be so appealing. After giving it some thought, Russell told her that the location made him think of a few people. She mentioned that she had heard of teleportation among magicians. What if he could just teleport to these people, she asked. In spite of his current ability to use teleportation magic, Russell informed her that he would never be able to teleport because of the complexity of the magic involved. They continued their conversation when she informed him that his cleaning was coming to an end tomorrow. She asked him to try his hardest all the way through. Russell grinned and expressed that he got it. The maid continued, saying that although she wasn't very knowledgeable about magic, he seemed like a decent man. Russell turned to face her and was shocked to hear her describe him in that way. The maid grinned and said she would still like to hire him as a janitor even if he didn't end up being a great magician. After chuckling, Russell said he would give it some thought. Later, everyone, including Russell, met Daria and Illa when they returned. Daria inquired as to whether he had had any downtime this week. With a smile, Russell answered that he had and that he was doing fantastic. Daria asked him to move aside so they could talk for a moment. Daria informed him that he had experienced a lot this week when they were by themselves, but Russell refuted it. Daria went on to explain that because elf mana is unique, it had taken her a long time to discover a remedy that would fully restore Lady Illa's mana. She added that she needed to check something in the archives in addition to that. Russell stated that she had a lot on her plate. Daria stated that the Raymond family had previously owned this estate. She turned to face Russell, and he looked down at once. Daria went on to say that Lady Illa had informed her that she had felt a flash in his heart. He was unable to enter the spiritual realm due to this flash. She questioned whether Russell felt insulted as he was already balling his fists. She asked if he felt offended or angry, and if not, if he was depressed. Russell mentioned everything above. Daria said it brought back memories of their first encounter. He developed his magic entirely on his own. But now she's beginning to believe that he was just a recluse attempting to start over with his family. She explained that's why he would now use this manner. Startled, he turned to face Daria. She informed him that she would not be offering it for free. He would have to train to be a warrior, a fire tower mage, and the nation's defender in exchange. She assured him that he would become extremely wealthy and be able to repurchase her real estate. Did he understand everything? She asked. Daria reassured Russell that he didn't have to suffer in silence as he thought in a daze. A little while later, Daria and Ilo were seated together once more. Lady Ilo claimed that when they previously succeeded in entering the Gate of Souls, she merely used her mana to guide him rather than reawakening his consciousness. The elf proposed that they visit the Gate of Souls together this time. With a downward glance, Russell inquired what if he inadvertently hurt Ilo again. She praised him and said that since they had purchased a large quantity of medication, everything would be alright. Russell apologized in a humiliating way. Like the last time, Ilo instructed him to close his eyes and focus on the fire. She would then be able to awaken in his subconscious after that. Ilo asked to be seen by Russell when she materialized in front of his eyes. Observing his hand, Russell thought this was the appearance of his pure mana. Ilo, who was standing next to him, said that up until that point, everything had gone according to plan, just like the previous time. As they approached, she informed them that the storm was still strong and that it would be difficult for them to travel much farther because of how close the surge was. Ilo tried to stop Russell from moving forward, claiming that he would hurt himself if he continued. Immediately, the strong energy knocked Russell back. He landed next to Ilo, and she warned him not to even consider the possibility. Russell began to experience intrusive thoughts, and he was unsure of how to deal with them. He expressed regret to Ilo and said he was genuinely unsure of how to let him go. He heard Daria's voice at that precise moment. While she was gone, she inquired with the maid about Russel's behavior. He was a pretty good boy, according to the maid. When Daria questioned whether she had truly left him alone, the maid replied that she had been bothering him, of course. Russel shut his eyes slightly and pondered over Professor Hubert, who had consistently shown him kindness. He thought back to the friendly estate workers who had entertained him. At last, he recalled what the maid had mentioned the evening before his final cleaning day. He saw a vision of Daria, who comforted him that he was not suffering in silence. As tears started to stream down Russel's cheeks, he realized that although he was 7 years old, he could still jump over these thoughts and feelings. He made the decision to consider how space curves and began making his way toward the precipice. Ilo was yelling at him to stop because it was extremely risky. Russel believed he would be all right. He bit his lip and persisted, believing that he would not fall alone. As he stepped off the cliff, fire materialized beneath his feet. I also breathed heavily as I watched him. The flash could be used by Russel. In front of the cliff, a tiny fire path emerged. I looked at Russel in amazement and at last gave him credit for finishing it by himself. Russel smiled as he turned around to face her. He was informed that his mission had been accomplished. When he reached the door after that, he told himself that he had succeeded in jumping over. However, another query then surfaced. And now, what should he do? He startled when he heard Ilo's voice behind him. She motioned for him to pass through the bright door in front of him. Though it was not surprising, he was taken aback to discover that he could still hear her after Lady Ilo explained that their mana remained connected. He was given a new assignment that required him to call a spirit and establish a deal with it. It was the half-breed elf Ilo's job to assist him in this. To place his hand on the door, the elf instructed him. Russel questioned her about what ought to occur next. It all depends on the spirit, she retorted. Russel remained standing, holding out his hand. Ilo stated that nobody can predict what will happen. Nobody has any idea what kind of soul will show up. Moreover, he may not even be selected. He should just wait with his hand extended, she continued. Daria was now standing close to Russel's actual body. They're at a loss for what else to do, Ilo continued. If attending is challenging, that's acceptable. He won't become irate. His hand started to glow at that point, and a moment later, a massive red dragon materialized next to him. Russel expressed his gratitude for every hardship that had brought him to this point. The dragon formed a layer of light by touching his hand with its head. Following that, Russel started to open his eyes and saw a cute little dragon on his feet right away. It was chewing on his shirt and growling at his feet. With joyful tears in her eyes, Ilo congratulated him, and Daria added that this was not the only occasion for celebration. Looking down, Russel saw not only his spirit but also the mark of the fourth circle on his chest. It must have slipped past him, he thought to himself. With a smile, Daria informed him that he had successfully surmounted a significant hindrance in his subconscious. In front of him, Russel noticed a message about an extra reward. The dragon suddenly flew up and landed on his shoulder, surprising him. The spirit then settled down on top of his head and gave it a paw hug. Ilo said that she didn't believe the small dragon to be an ordinary spirit as she walked over to examine it. She asked Russel what he was going to name it as she removed it from his head and gave it to him. Russel extended his hands to accept it. Ilo promised to fulfill their agreement by naming the dragon. The boy was instructed by the maid to name the baby well. Russel held it up to his face and declared that he could call it Bacon because of how red it was. The three women were taken aback by this, and Ilo's mouth fell open. Russel chuckled, claiming to be kidding. The dragon he was holding gave a happy growl when he proposed the name Pepper. Daria and Ilo agreed, stating that the name was quite adorable. To Russel, Pepper was just a shorthand for pepperoni. Daria grinned and informed him that, in honor of the occasion, they could begin a special training session tomorrow. She could teach him a lesson about spirits, Ilo continued. Russel said he couldn't wait while holding his little dragon. When the infant growled once more, Russel greeted him with a smile. It was time for the towers to welcome their students 1 month later. Among the men present was one who expressed interest in knowing the number of graduates that would be chosen this year. The person next to him stated that it was already decided in any case. The judge of the White Royal Tower was declared to have arrived at that precise moment, and a white-haired woman emerged from her carriage. Each tower selected a pupil to serve as a mentor for the full academic year. The first one was followed by the judge of the Yellow Royal Tower. The judge of the Royal Tower spear user arrived later. The two carried on their conversation, certain that they had been selected by a tower. They began to say that everything was for the Academy's benefit, and that it was only for their school when the professor suddenly materialized in front of them while they were laughing. When Hubert looked at them, he realized that they were the kind of professors who only cared about helping their friends. It was announced at that very moment that the fiery Royal Tower's judge had also arrived. Shaken, he turned to face the carriage and watched as a massive man named Vermilion Olsen got out. Professor Herbert was working there, but he wasn't quite sure what he was doing. Vermilion stated that he had not yet seen the person he was waiting for after taking a quick look around. Professor Hubert reasoned that if he arrived, it could only indicate that he was genuinely hesitant to select Russel. Russel was using his flash to navigate the city at that precise moment. Vermilion turned to him as he approached the castle. He turned to face Russel, who had just succeeded in landing atop the structure. He felt that he had just about survived. He met the judge's gaze with his downward glance. He was not entirely sure what Olsen was getting into here, but the judge turned around right away, sensing that this was going to be an interesting day. He was so eager to break this man. Earlier, as he bid farewell to Daria, Ilo, and the maid, Russel expressed his gratitude for all that they had done for him. He expressed to Ilo his hope for a smooth and efficient journey home. Ilo thanked her guardian with a bow. The maid was taken aback when he turned to face her and promised to be back. Dick asked her to keep the estate tidy and said he would return when it was his. After adjusting her glasses, the maid promised to monitor the situation. Despite not having spent much time at the estate, Russel turned to face the three and admitted that he owed them a great deal. When Daria asked if he was certain he wouldn't need a carriage, he replied that he wasn't, but that he needed to get moving in order to arrive on time. Daria gave him a quick glance before saying, "If that's the case, I have a request for you." She asked him to deliver a letter to Professor Hubert after giving it to him. Russel assured them he would deliver it without any issues. Daria gave him thanks for that. Russel was back in his professor's office later, having already given Lady Daria the letter. Professor Hubert expressed his satisfaction that Russel was able to arrive on time in the end. He continued by saying that even in this case, he would still be unable to assist him in the qualifiers. Placing the letter on the table, he announced that he had to get on with something urgent. He was told by Russel not to worry about it. He was advised by the professor not to disregard Andon's account. Hubert got to his feet and stated that he had to win the selection by being the best candidate. Russel could certainly pull it off. The boy had given him a hard look and assured him that the professor had no reason to doubt him. Russel was given the task of demonstrating his abilities at a qualifying competition and persuading the judges that he was the most deserving applicant. Subsequently, the office was informed of the selection competition's first round. A test exam was the first component. Russel took a seat at his desk and got to work quickly on the test. He believed that the written exam was not too challenging. In a previous life, he had passed it multiple times. Despite the fact that it's just a letter for his teacher, there's nothing to be concerned about. Following that, Professor Hubert's business travels increased to the point where he occasionally ran out of time for his own classes. When Professor Herbert went on vacation shortly after, he passed away. He never found out what had happened, but it was most likely a task that even a magician of his caliber had grown too hard. Everyone around Russel was taken aback when it was revealed that he had received the highest score on the written exam. But all he could think about was if there was any way he could stop his professor from dying. The qualifying competition's second round began. When their name was called, the magicians who were seated in the hallway were instructed to come in. Russel snapped to attention as soon as he heard his name, confident that he could succeed. He entered the chamber containing all of the judges. He became aware that everything he needed was in front of him. He was already able to alter this reality because he doesn't recall Olsen attending competitions as a judge in his previous life. For this reason, he must ascend the Tower of Fire in order to prevent Professor Hubert from dying. He ought to be elevated to judgeship. A man standing off to the side advised Russel to only provide precise and well-thought-out answers to the questions posed by the judges. When he inquired about how well Russel understood him, the young man gave a positive response. The white-haired woman promised they would get started right away. She started questioning him concerning old formulas. Russel was able to explain and respond to this question with ease. He believed that compared to the written exam, these questions were even simpler. In the second stage, there was one more task, though. He was suddenly faced with a brilliant burst of light and realized that, at this point, he also had to resist the judge's mana's power. Russel stood his ground, recalling that he had always failed the exam at this point in his previous life, but that this time around things were completely different. He just stood there, unflinching, and answered the judge's questions. One of them commented that this man was truly amazing because, despite a powerful flow of mana, his face did not change. The judge then expressed disapproval, stating that this was insufficient. Upon releasing his mana, he applied pressure to Russel, who sensed it right away. His aura seemed to dim, leading the other judges to believe he was truly unqualified. The candidate might pass away there at this rate. The judge gave Russel a quick glance, but he remained firmly seated. The way he handled it surprised the judge. They were all quite impressed, in their opinion. The mana strain was almost too much for even the novice professors watching from the sidelines. All of the judges agreed that this man was unquestionably brilliant. In front of Russel, plaques recognizing the judge's recognition during the selection started to appear. One by one, the numbers rose until they reached 9. With his arms crossed, Andon gave him a look as he realized the boy had survived. He became enraged and grinned evilly, telling himself to cling on for dear life. He repeatedly raised his mana pressure, causing the veins on Russel's face to jut out. These two men were not going to give up. There were still a lot of candidates to consider, so one of the judges touched Andy's shoulder and advised her to stop at this point. Additionally, he turned to face him, gritted his teeth, apologized, and said he was just getting started on the fun. When the professors on the side were able to exhale normally and cough it up, Russel believed he had made it through the ordeal. He was praised by the female judge, who described him as a good boy, and she allowed him to leave. He was relieved to find a chair in the hallway when he emerged. He let out a breath, feeling as though he'd just about passed out. He took a quick look at the message acknowledging the judge, but this outcome was insufficient in the end. He thought that this would be difficult, but he had to do it, and he smiled tiredly. Subsequently, during their internal discussion about the contestants, the judges reached out to Russel Raymond. It appears that Sonu White, the Fire Tower Master of Darien, has her eye on him, according to one of the judges. It is quite tragic for him, according to others, that everyone wants to embrace him. A fair-haired woman questioned him about when his junior apprentice training would begin. Moreover, he turned to face her and angrily demanded to know who had expressed his desire for him to become his apprentice. Despite the woman's best efforts to soothe him, he turned around and left, trailing the other judge in his wake. He recalled the occasion when the newcomer was yelled at to adequately defend himself, but he was unable to tolerate it because a fissure in his shield developed. One by one, the knights started to fall, losing the war. They were just unable to tolerate it. Later, in the midst of the battleground, Andon stood by himself, covered in blood. He declared that everyone on the battlefield would suffer as a result of him if one weakling fell. Tears were falling freely down his bruised face. He got even angrier when he realized this. And now we see that the third stage of the competition has begun. The person on the stage said that the next challenge was a treasure hunt. In the forest on Lush Valker Hill, they will search for green mana stones. Rewards will be given out for the number of stones and speed of collection. Russel knew immediately that everyone would be trying to steal the stones from each other. Participants were ordered to form up. A notice appeared in front of Russel, wondering if Wilson would recognize it if he passed the third test. And so the team was given and the participants ran. There was only one thing Russel could do right now. As Russel entered the forest, he wondered if he should summon him now, since he was probably already bored. And so Russel called Pepper. Russel said that they had not seen each other for a long time and apologized, because in the academy you cannot use magic. Pepper was glad to see him again. Then Russel asked Pepper for help. He showed the mana stone and asked Pepper to find similar ones. Pepper sniffed the rock and flew off somewhere. Russel had heard that spirits could sense even the slightest trace of mana. Pepper found the first stone very quickly. Russel continued to search further. Then we are suddenly transported to the store. A man in a raincoat asks the clerk about the mage he exchanged with. The vendor said that he just sold him the ingredients for the ritual. A man in a raincoat and mask asked the clerk if he knew that this ritual was pagan witchcraft. The seller was shocked. The man slammed the seller against the wall and said that supporting cults is equal to treason to the kingdom. The man once again asked the shopkeeper about where the magician had gone. The shopkeeper said he didn't know, but he had just heard that the Fire Tower's mistress had taken a disciple, and that person wanted to test him. The hooded man ran off somewhere, thinking that if this man from the cult resented the teacher, then Russel was in danger. The man in the hood was Professor Hubert. He ran as fast as he could to the students, because everyone is in danger there. And here we see how one of the participants walks through the forest without finding a single stone. He thinks that he does not even use light so as not to attract attention. Suddenly, something moved in the bushes, and then someone got up from there who was scared. The contestant immediately used a wind arrow on that person. The contestant couldn't tell if it was a disciple or if it was already dead. But this is a competition, and before leaving, the contestant thought that this person might have mana stones. He was looking for a man, but he was missing. Suddenly, this someone was behind the contestant. It wasn't a person at all, but a skeleton whose eyes were glowing green. The contestant screamed. Then we see Russel again, walking into the middle of the woods. There, he saw bags of mana stones. She wondered where all these mana stones came from. He praised Pepper, but still felt that something was wrong. He bent down and saw that there was also a golem core that was broken. Russel assumed that the core was broken before the golem was summoned. Suddenly Pepper screamed, trying to warn Russel. Stone spikes rose from the ground. Russel dodged, covering his body with an aura, while thinking that since earth magic and light magic were used, it wasn't just one person. We see rays flying at him from the white sphere, but he dodges very carefully. He dodged another attack, but suddenly blue arrows started flying from behind. But Pepper burned them with his mouth flame. Russel praised Pepper. Russel then created fire arrows and used them to break the light balls. There was an explosion that smoked everything around, but when the smoke cleared, Russel saw people. He asked who they were from. Russel said that they were honorary students chosen by the tower, but they were cowardly in using such tactics. The green-haired student was furious. He couldn't understand how a student like Russell could find the mana stones first. He was sure that they were the only ones who knew about the location of the stone, and then he suddenly saw the spirit, Pepper. The other students saw it too, and now he understood how Russell had discovered the stone so quickly. They thought it was incredible how Russel Raymond hid such a level of skill. Russell smiled and asked what was so important about finding a mana stone quickly. He said that it sounded like he shouldn't have discovered it, and the disciple suddenly became nervous. Russell then said that if you think about it, it seems that the students secretly made a deal with a couple of professors. The student was not happy that Russell understood everything so quickly. Russell said he had no intention of doing so and asked me to just get out of the way. The student got angry because he thought Russell was lying and was about to hit him. Suddenly, Russell was behind them and said that if they didn't leave, they would regret it. The students watching from the bushes were startled and shocked. Then Pepper growled something. Russell became alert and then said that the forest was moving. He turned to the student and asked if the professors who were helping them had told them that they would destroy the golem. The student replied that they were not told anything, and the second student said that they also found it strange. Russell created a fire arrow and said that someone was coming, he was ready to fight. We see someone running out of the dense forest, scaring away the birds in their path. They were strange monsters whose eyes glowed green. Russell was afraid of the undead killers. The students were terrified and couldn't understand how these ghouls ended up at the test site. The student was overcome with fear, thinking only that he should run away. He was drenched in sweat, he started to run, but suddenly stopped. They were completely surrounded, and he realized that there was nowhere to run. Russell used a wall of fire. The student was surprised, because the fire wall is the fourth magic circle. Russell will say that everyone will take on one side and fight those who break through the wall. The students stood in silence and stared at Russell. He yelled at them to respond, and the terrified students agreed to Russell's plan. The student was thinking that they wanted to fight Russell, so Russell would have dealt with them in no time. Although the fire wall protected them, some undead creatures still passed through it. Russell killed them with fire arrows, thinking that the wall was only a temporary measure and they needed to find a mage. And here we see two magicians. One of them says that Russell is a child from the fire tower, and the second smirks and says that he is wondering how much Russell will last. We see zombies trying to break through the wall of fire, but even so, Russell kills them with arrows. Heretics who use forbidden magic and the creatures they summon eat undead. Russell recalled that in the past, the teacher had gotten rid of the heretics. He couldn't tell if it was leftovers or why they were here. Suddenly, Russell realized something, that maybe they were coming for him. The undead continued to attack. Russell was thinking that he should concentrate on the battle now, since the opponents were using curse magic. And she doesn't use much mana, and if this continues, they'll lose. Russell shouted to the students to use the Mara more effectively. He told them to lower their strength and aim for important points. The students said that the judges will come soon anyway, if they hold out. The students said that the teachers would not come. While Russell was shooting fire arrows, he said it was true. After all, the judges couldn't help but notice this vicious energy. This means that the opponents definitely used a trap to hide their mana. Russell thought of the trap that had been set in the tree. This meant that the students had to deal with the undead themselves. The student who used ice magic began to reduce the ice flows and sharpen the corners, and thus continued to kill the undead. The second student was shouting about what was the point of fighting in such a sophisticated way. The student who used light magic also started saving mana. The green-haired student was the only one who hadn't done so yet. He was desperate. The heretic said that they quickly understood and started saving mana. The second heretic said they were the woman's children, meaning Darius. Then summoning a huge monster, he said, but what if they can't save any more mana? And then the students heard that something huge was approaching. Then they saw him break through the wall of fire with ease. It snarled angrily. The students were scared. This monster is a troll. The student used an ice field, while the second one was scared, but still helped and used the crystal laser spell. However, after these attacks, the troll didn't take any damage. He only became more aggressive. Then he swung his hammer. He wanted to kill the student. The student was standing in horror when suddenly something red flew past him. It was Russell's spell. Russell used the flaming spear with all the strength he could muster. Then the troll dropped his hammer and began to fall. The heretic was surprised at how this could be. They were shocked that Russell had defeated the troll in one blow. The students were also shocked. One of them thought that this magic was comparable to the fifth circle in its destructive power, and then couldn't believe that they were actually studying together. Suddenly Russell noticed something again. He looked up in the air and saw Pepper flying in circles in the air. The heretics also saw Pepper flying over them. Russell grinned and said, so that's where they were hiding. Russell used the wizard's body spell. The student couldn't understand what Russell was up to. Russell swung with all his might, said it was his turn, and hurled the spear at the heretics with great speed. The heretics were scared because they were discovered and now they need to dodge the spear. The spear continued to fly and the heretic used the undead and ordered them to block. The The undead started to run towards the spear, but it was no use as the spear destroyed them with ease. The heretic was terrified that his technique didn't work and the undead couldn't protect him from the spear. Then it will summon some obstacle in front of it. The spear flew and there was a powerful explosion. Russel couldn't tell if he'd hit it or not. One of the heretics, all wounded, screams that the woman raised a monster. Then the second heretic said they kept it for the judges, and he didn't think he'd have to use it against Russel. Russel was taken aback as he saw his comrades being captured by the skeletons. And so the 4 students were surrounded by these skeletons, each skeleton holding a student, threatening with a sword. And here we see the judges telling Professor Hubert that only judges can enter here. Hubert called out to Wilson. Wilson said the mission was over. Hubert shouted that the cult's followers had taken action, and Wilson was shocked to hear this. Hubert said that they attacked Russel, and the selection candidates are also in danger. Wilson was furious, saying how dare they create trouble right in front of him. The heretic said that if Russel moved a finger, he would kill all the students and turn them into his warriors. The students were gagged to prevent them from casting spells. Russel started thinking things up, knowing that he couldn't stop him even if he used the flash, otherwise they would all die. The heretic told Russel not to resist and came over, calling him the child of the fire tower. Russel knew they'd come for him. Mana began to radiate from Russel's ring. Russel started toward the heretic. The heretic said it was impressive, and he couldn't even believe that Russel would give up his life to save his friends. Russel asked what kind of friends they were talking about, because they call weaklings weak, and the strong are strong. Contempt, hatred, envy, these people are always jealous of someone. The heretic heard this and his smile faded. Russel said a heretic wouldn't understand. After all, the Guardian's mission is to protect people. The students were surprised to hear this. The heretic was bored by this and said that in a world where the strong prey on the weak, this is mission or justice. He said that such big words are spoken by weaklings. Russel decided to infuriate the heretic. Russel said it was coming from someone who was hiding behind their backs and was afraid to kill. The heretic was very angry. Russel was captured by a skeleton heretic warrior. The heretic said that if this is what Russel wants, then he will kill him with his own hands. Russel was also gagged. The heretic was angry, and he used his magic to kill the child of the fire tower. The heretic said he wished he could hear Russel's screams because he was gagged, but he had no choice. He held a weapon made of magic in his hands and aimed at Russel. As Russel stood there, he thought about how there was magic that didn't need a spell. It can be used by thought. He remembered that he had been given an extra reward. This extra reward was a ring. Artifact magic is the kind of magic that doesn't require spells. That ring is a cloud ring. This ring can turn into a thundercloud. The powers of this ring are revealed as Russel grows. And now we see that a thunderstorm has appeared in the clouds above them. The heretic brandished his weapon and said that Russel's death would be the beginning of their revenge. Suddenly, he noticed lightning in the sky. He looked and didn't understand what was happening to the sky. Russel silently cast the thunder hoof spell. Everything shone. The light from the lightning was too strong. And so Russel used the lightning summon, and it struck down. It was so bright that the students couldn't see anything and had to cover their eyes with their hands. We see the silhouette of a heretic standing in the shadows. The thing that was in the heretic's hands broke, and the heretic himself was fried by lightning. However, Russel was unaffected by the lightning as he stood with his hands tied. Russel was electrified, and there were small bursts of electricity around him. A student came up to him and said that she couldn't believe that Russel would use artifact magic in such a situation and said that he was really amazing. She untied his hands, then Russel removed the gag and thanked her. She said they should be thanking him. The student said that they should call the judges because it seems that everyone needs treatment. Meanwhile, the students were freeing each other. Russel said the judges would be here soon. The student asked in surprise how the judges could know, to which Russel replied that his friend would bring them. And here we see Pepper, who burns traps with his fire, flying through the forest. We see the streak of flame that Pepper made. The student was surprised at how well Russel had thought it all out. Russel, meanwhile, was thinking about the cloud ring. It turned out that the ring was using more mana than he expected. Suddenly, the heretic's body began to emit green mana. He was in a semi-fainting state, bones starting to gather around him. He said one sentence, "Dedicate your life and death." Russel and the student were both alert. The bones of all the skeletons that were nearby started to gather. The heretic used the giant skeleton summon. According to Russel's calculations, this greatly exceeds the 5th round. The student shouted to everyone to run into the forest. All the students started to run into the forest, but one was so scared that he only thought that he had to escape at all costs. He needed mana stones for some reason in such a dangerous situation. Russel didn't run away, and the student asked him why he wasn't running and what he was doing. Russel said that was all the heretic wanted, and that Russel was the only one who could buy them time. Meanwhile, Wilson and Hubert run to the students. Now Russel was standing in front of a giant skeleton. The student couldn't figure out what Russel was up to, because his mana was already running out. The skeleton raised its arm and hit Russel, but Russel dodged. He thought that such a thing cannot be blocked with a shield. Every blow of a skeleton is very dangerous. Russel swung his fire spear and sent it flying straight at the skeleton. He hit the side of the skeleton, and with this blow, he destroyed a small part of the skeleton. According to Russel, this attack hit well, but everything is complicated. Suddenly, we see that the skeleton has begun to regenerate, which Russel was unpleasantly surprised by. Russel noticed that a skeletal limb was stuck in the ground. Under the ground, it started moving towards Russel, and only when it almost killed Russel did he realize that it was the skeleton's tail. Russel fell to the ground from this. The tail went straight to Russel, but suddenly the tail was covered with ice. It was a student who told Russel that he had saved her life, so she couldn't just leave him. The female student attacked the skeleton with her ice spears. He said that just as Russel had said, this was the Guardian's mission. Meanwhile, the students suddenly stopped and started running back. The most cowardly of them ran with a bag of mana stones and asked the students why they were going back there. He said they were all mad and that if anything happened to them, it wasn't his fault. We see that the second heretic woke up and found it difficult to move. He looked at the battlefield and realized that it was a sacrifice for the giant skeleton. He laughed and said it was just as well for that heretic, because he did all sorts of bad things just for the sake of his own skin. Students approached Russel and one of them said that everyone was ready to fight. The student apologized for the delay. Russel saw this and thought that it wasn't part of his plan. He didn't know what to say, but then he smiled and summoned a fire spear and said that since they wanted to fight together, he wouldn't stop them. Russel went on to say that if students want to live, if they want to win, then they should listen carefully. Russel said he would break through the giant skeleton's defenses and they would attack with all their might. After saying that, he threw the fire spear at the skeleton with all his might. It hit the skeleton right in the head, and then Russel gave the command to the students. All the students also used magic to hit the skeleton. A powerful explosion was formed, but it was not enough to kill the skeleton. It began to regenerate again. Russel was very weak, but he still tried to create a flaming spear once again, because they were all risking their lives for the Guardian's mission, for Russel's sake. He was motivated by these people and decided that he should not stop, he should protect them all. Now we see that Russel has created a flaming spear, but his eyes have changed. He used the maximum power of the flaming spear, then prepared himself and threw the spear with all his strength. The students also attacked. Their spears connected with Russel's spear and flew straight at the giant's head. I ran over and saw the students fighting a giant skeleton. He was furious at the students' actions, because they were weaklings in his opinion and should have just run away. Olsen Vermilion believed that empathy was a weakness. If one falls, the others will follow. And here's Russel's giant spear. But that day, Wilson understood. And now we see that this spear destroyed a giant skeleton. That day, he realized that through empathy, if one of them got up, everyone would reach out to him. The spears hit the giant and there was a massive explosion. We see that there was a heretic in the giant's head. His eyes were glowing red, and he did not want to accept this outcome, so he decided that he was not going to give up yet, and the skeleton began to regenerate again. Wilson immediately used the superheat spell and concentrated his mana in his palm. The heretic saw this and was horrified. Then, throwing this, he caused the sinful creature to disappear, and with this spell, he destroyed the giant skeleton. Wilson's view was now completely empty. Russel told him that if he wanted to help, he should have come earlier. He then collapsed, but was picked up by Professor Hubert, who praised Russel for doing a good job. Wilson only smiled a little. Now Russel finally got Wilson's confession. Hubert asked Russel if he had woken up. Russel asked if the other students were okay, to which Hubert replied that they were fine thanks to Russel. Hubert said the students were all saying that if it wasn't for Russel, they might have died. Russel said they helped, too. Hubert then asked if he was interested in the test results. Russel had completely forgotten about the test. Hubert said they had a lot to talk about. When the heretics attacked the students, the test task became meaningless. Teamwork was more important than competition. Given this, the judges came to a single decision. In this test, the highest score is from Russel. Russel was surprised, happy to hear that he had the highest score in the tower test. He was happy to finally graduate from the academy. Hubert continued the conversation about heretics. He said that they had already started an investigation to find out who was behind all this and soon they would find the root of this evil. Russel said there was another heretic there. Hubert was surprised that they hadn't killed all of them. And now we see where the second heretic disappeared. During the battle, he crawled away into the forest. He was angry and thought about how he would repay the Fire Tower rookie for this disgrace. Suddenly, Wilson came into the room, saying that they seemed to have missed him. He asked Russel to step outside for a moment. Hubert was excited and said that Russel needed to rest, but Russel turned to the professor and said that everything was fine. Then they came to a vacant lot. Wilson said that in the battle against the heretics, Russel must have felt limited because he had weaklings with him. Wilson said he thinks empathy is a weakness, and so far no one has convinced him otherwise. Russel said he agreed with him, but the weak exist so that the strong become even stronger to protect them. And those, thanks to the received protection, will also want to become stronger. And no one will be left behind, everyone will only take a step forward. Wilson smiled and said that wasn't a bad answer. Then he tossed the bag to him and told him to open it. Russel was surprised to see that the fire tower robe was there. Wilson told Russel to take his time, because if he wanted to get into the fire tower, he would have to pass another test. Russel thought that the test of the towers was already over and he couldn't understand what Wilson was talking about. Wilson said it was an ancient tradition. Then he drew a circle around himself and told Russel that he should push him out of the circle, using any magic at the same time. If Wilson gets out of the circle, Russel wins. But if Russel loses, he'll get what he deserves. Summoning the vault behind him, he pulled out something and told Wilson not to regret it later. Jin just smiled and asked Wilson if he really could use whatever magic he wanted. And we can see that everything was shaking. Even Hubert, who was at the academy, felt it and was worried. We flash back to Wilson and see that he has 1 foot outside the circle. He thought that his defense was higher than the 5th circle, but Russel still pushed him away. Hubert suddenly came running and started shouting at Wilson, asking what he was doing. Hubert was angry and he asked Wilson why he was torturing Russel because his body hadn't recovered yet. Wilson said it was an ancient tradition. Hubert said that only old people said that, and Wilson got angry when he heard that. They started arguing about it. Wilson said it was to discipline Russel. Hubert said that if he was disciplined anymore, the whole academy would fall apart. Hubert apologized to Russel for Wilson, but Russel laughed and said it was all right. Wilson said that in any case, only Russel passed the test. Wilson was surprised that Russel had used a magic artifact, and he didn't think Russel would summon a spirit. Wilson said he was honestly surprised. Hubert asked if Russel had summoned a spirit. Russel summoned the spirit again and said his name was Pepper, and so he showed it to the teachers. At first they silently looked at him without giving out emotions, and then they still said that he was cute. And now we see Russel finish his speech. We see that he is dressed like a graduate, and he wished everyone to receive mana enlightenment. All the students applauded him. Hubert went with Russel and said it was the right speech for a top student. Russel thanked the professor. Hubert said that Russel was no longer a student, so Russel could just call him senior. Hubert asked him if he had a place to stay in the capital. Russel said he wanted to rent a small room on the outskirts of town. Hubert said that this was not necessary and allowed me to stay with him. After all, he still won't come back as long as he has a contract with the academies. Russel asked if he would be in the way, to which Hubert said no. Russel thought about how he hadn't used the house he'd bought from his teacher. He had some kind of deja vu. And now we see that Russel is located in the room. A notification has appeared in front of him. On it were congratulations on graduating from the academy, as well as special awards, including a high-quality magic stone. A map appeared in Russell's hand, and when he opened it, it was the same map. Another notification appeared, but this time with a mission. Russel needs to find a point on the map and complete the mission. He looked at the map and said that he knew exactly where it was. This is a forbidden island that people don't land on, Kulil Island. It's filled with magical beasts. This is a very dangerous place where you can only stay from the 6th circle. Russel was very interested, thinking about what this opportunity wanted from him. He wondered if it wanted him to get stronger, or if it wanted him to get stronger and do something about it. In any case, Russel doesn't know yet, but he does know that you need to get stronger to protect the weak. And here we see Russel riding in a carriage. Wilson asked him if this was his first time in the capital. Russel said he'd been there before. Wilson remembered that Russel was Raymond, which was why he was in the capital. Russel said there was something else he wanted to ask, and he asked about Professor Hubert's assignment and whether it was related to heretics. Russel asked that if the assignment was unrelated, then why did the professor return immediately during the heretics' attack? Wilson smiled and said Russel was smart. He told me that Russel was right, that Hubert had to find the heretic society. Although it's hard to call them a society, Russel said he wanted to help Hubert. Wilson took it as a joke and smiled. But then I realized that Russel wasn't bluffing. He had a very confident look in his eyes. Wilson said that a man should have big dreams and that he would talk to the master about it. Russel was delighted and thanked Wilson. But Wilson suddenly stipulated that he would only talk to the magister if Russel learned one spell before arriving in the capital. Wilson said this spell is called overheating. This magic kills with a single hit. Wilson said that this spell kills with a single hit, but it has its limitations. He told Russel to pretend that he was drawing his mana and firing it like a slingshot. He asked Russel if he could handle it. Russel started training even when they were sitting around the campfire, and even when they were driving, he continued to train on the roof of the carriage. And now we see rocks flying all over the place. Russel made a huge hole in the rock face with the superheat spell. It exceeded all of Wilson's expectations. Wilson didn't think that Russel would add his element magic to the superheat, and he couldn't remember seeing anyone as talented as Russel. Wilson told Russel that he probably already realized that overheating was wasting a lot of mana. Wilson warned that you need to be careful with this spell, because after using it, you can counterattack. Russel asked if this meant that you shouldn't use it against strong opponents. Wilson said that wasn't always the case and asked Russel to remember that the best defense is offense. A strong opponent can be encountered at any moment, but the strong are used to underestimating those who are weaker than them, and when they weaken their defense, at that moment the trump card in the sleeve will determine the outcome of the battle. And so the heroes reached the capital. Getting out of the carriage, Russel recognized a man who also got out of the carriage. Daria congratulated Russel on joining the Tower of Fire, and he said that it was thanks to her that he was here. Daria remembered something else. She said that his arrival coincided with the Master of the Lance Tower, Alan Page, the Mage of the Spear Tower, and next to him sits Melville Hemingway, the Master of the Spear Tower. Melville said that he was wondering why Daria chose this particular day, but it turned out that she wanted to show off her new student. Daria said that this was true and she wanted to show off because Russel had already become a hero who defeated the heretics. Then she asked Melville if he should reproach her for showing off as a student. Russel thought about Alan Page. Russel thought back to his previous life, where in a few years, Alan would become the youngest Sixth Circle mage, an incredible genius. In his previous life, he had helped Russel a lot. He didn't think that they would meet again like this. Melville said he couldn't help but brag. According to him, objectively speaking, Alan is stronger. Wilson thought that the two of them were at it again. Daria and Melville began to argue. Daria asked if he had forgotten that her student was younger, to which Melville replied that he had considered this when comparing them. And so they started arguing and laughing at each other. The flow of mana in the room was incredible. Alan put a hand on Melville's shoulder and said that the Magister didn't usually act like this, but when he was with Daria, the child in him woke up and Melville was annoyed. Alan said that Melville just missed being young, and Melville asked him what kind of nonsense he was talking about. Alan then leaned over and asked Melville in his ear if he still needed to go to the palace, and hearing this, Melville calmed down. Alan then spoke to Russel and apologized for being so impudent when they first met, and they held out their hands to each other. Russel said it was fine, but he was a little disappointed. I thought I could show Alan my magic. Wilson was pleasantly surprised by Russel's words. What a brave fellow, Melville said, and laughed. The old man then released his mana and asked Russel why he was so confident. Russel was surrounded by the mana of the Master of the Spear Tower, and he felt like he was in an ocean. The old man smiled. He didn't think that he would be surprised by anything else in this lifetime. The old man then stood up and addressed the Fire Tower Master. He offered her a bet. The bottom line was that if Daria's disciple didn't catch up with his disciple in 5 years, Melville would give her one mythical relic. Russel was surprised, for he knew about mythical relics that they were artifacts that had existed since the forgotten days of myth. As far as he knows, even the weakest relics contain mana around the 7th circle. Daria said that 3 years would be enough, and Melville was surprised and asked her again. Daria said that if her disciple didn't catch up to Melville's disciple in 3 years, then she would give him the mythical relic. The old man laughed and said there was no turning back. Daria told Melville that he could say goodbye to the relic in advance. The old man then told Alan to follow him and left. As he left, he was still laughing and had a smile on his face. We see them go down the stairs and Alan asks Melville if he can put up a mythical relic. The old man said he couldn't put it on, of course. Hearing this, Alan was surprised. The old man said that's why Alan should try. Alan said that he was older than Russel after all, so he thought he would definitely win. As the old man descended the stairs, he saw Raymond through the window. Russel apologized to Wilson, who scolded him for managing to find an adventure on the first day. The old man wondered if he had really regressed. So we flash back and see Daria telling Russel that according to Olsen, Russel wants to help track down the cult members. Russel said it was true. She said she almost got the report from the spies, so Russel was just in time. The spies found traces of the cult members who attacked the academy. The report says that this is the neutral city of Sudra. A cult member tries to escape alone. What Russel knew about Sudra was that it was a so-called criminal paradise. A cult member has chosen a good place to escape. Daria told Russel that since he had personally encountered the culprit, it would be easier for him to track him down. But she warned that the criminal will most likely be ready to defend himself again. She asked if Russel still wanted to take the risk. Russel clenched his fist, then placed it over his heart and leaned down a little to say that he would do his duty as the guardian of the kingdom. Daria breathed a sigh of relief and told him to leave tomorrow morning. She said that she would prepare the warp gate for him and reminded him to bring ammunition. Russel was glad that she had allowed it, because it was the first step in saving Professor Hubert from death. We see Russel already riding in the carriage. Russel was given 2 top-ranked potions on the journey and was pleasantly surprised, as they were too expensive for him even in his previous life. Russel was thinking that even though she had given permission for this mission, he must be worried since Russel was the youngest. As Russel stared out the window, he remembered something, namely a place. He shouted to the coachman that he would stop here for a while. This building is the Louvre Museum. This is where time travel began. All this time, Russel thought about why such a miracle had happened to him, and then he came to his own conclusion. In his opinion, it was for his growth and so that he could protect more people. Suddenly, 2 mission notifications came in. First, protecting the heart of the Dragon Nation. You need to make a big contribution to justify giving things that belong to the royal family. It's difficult, but not impossible. Secondly, draconification. Russel could not understand what it was, and then an explanation of draconification appeared. Mana suddenly enveloped him, and his eyes changed. Russel remembered feeling this way before, the feeling of magic being enhanced at critical moments. Then he looked at his reflection and was surprised to see himself like this for the first time. Even as he sat in his room, he thought that the power must have manifested itself during the trial of fire. He remembered those notifications. He thought that if only he could control it at will, he would probably be able to increase the power by adding superheating to the dragonification. This can be a fatal blow close to the 6th circle. The only problem is that he doesn't know how to do it. After all, power only shows up when he's in danger. Russel doesn't have time to train because of the mission. And even if it did, it wouldn't be possible to achieve this with normal training. Pepper suddenly had an idea, and he was trying to get Russel's attention, but Russel was too lost in thought. Russel was thinking that no matter how hard he focused, he couldn't just feel it. Pepper got angry and let out fire. He still managed to draw attention to himself. Russel realized that Pepper was saying that he could help him. So Pepper climbed up and sat on Russel's head. Russel closed his eyes, and when he opened them, he was somewhere else. This place, this spirit world, is where he first met Pepper. Russel realized that this was an ideal place for magical training, since the passage of time here was not the same as outside. But Russel doesn't have a sparring partner. Just as he said that, he turned around and saw a giant fearsome dragon. He was a little scared, so he asked the dragon if it was Pepper. The dragon began to caress him, and Russel let out a sigh of relief. Russel thanked Pepper for his help and was just about to say that he didn't want to fight him when a whole crowd of opponents suddenly appeared. Russel said he didn't think he should have worried. His enemies were coming up to him, stretching their arms. Suddenly we are transported to another place. There is a bartender and 3 men in a raincoat. One of them said that the heretics had escaped from the city, and the other asked if they should go after them. And now we see the captain, with a scar on his eye, and one of his arms and stomach bandaged. He said he ordered these 2 to gather everyone on deck. Then he turned to the bartender, calling him Jackson, and told him to report to the tower that the situation had changed. Jackson, a middle-aged man with white hair and a mustache, understood the captain's order and told him to be careful. The captain smiled and told Jackson not to worry. The captain said that Daria's apprentice would be arriving soon. The captain won't let him take away the chance to play. And now, with the captain at the head, 3 spies moved out. As it became clear, they were dressed the same. Then we are transported 3 days ahead to a certain house. In this house, we see Jackson thinking that the Fire Tower disciple should come soon. Jackson has made an urgent report from Sudra, and it turns out that the Fire Tower scouts are missing. Then we flash back and see 2 men looking at something with disdain. They looked at Russel and couldn't understand what this little guy was doing here. The action takes place in the neutral city of Sudra. Russel walks through the streets of Sudra and reflects that without the teleportation gate, it would take him quite a long time to get to Sudra, about a week. But thanks to training in the spirit world, where time stops, it's like a month has passed for Russel. We see how Russel is covered in fire and changes shape. During this time he has mastered dragonification. He completed the mission of using the power of dragons. We also see that his dragon horns will match his level, and that when using dragonification, the understanding of the fire element increases greatly. But Russel had some usage issues that needed to be addressed. We can see how after he used dragonification, the countdown started from 15. Russel recalls how in the spirit world he fought with opponents using dragonification, but at one unexpected moment, suddenly his flame spell disappeared and he himself became the same as usual. This was the problem, the short usage time of dragonification. The maximum that he managed to reach during this time is 15 seconds. The second problem is that he gets very tired after using it. After use, it is defenseless as after overheating. He was walking when suddenly he was stopped by blocking the way with a baton. It was the bald man who noticed Russel, and he asked him if Russel was lost. The bald man said he could help Russel. Taking off the bag, Russel said what a coincidence it was, which of course the men didn't understand. And now we are transported to a building. We see the battered face of a man who smiles and politely says that this building is a yellow wyvern. Both men bowed to the Russels and wished him luck. He just told them to leave. When Russel walked into the building, the bartender immediately greeted him. The bartender asked Russel what he wanted, and Russel said he wanted a cocktail of 37-year-old Drake and 12-year-old Briggs. The person sitting next to him said that Russel was crazy if he was going to drink a 70% cocktail. Russel sighed heavily and thought about the fact that you could actually die from this, and this is the secret code from the fire tower. The bartender couldn't believe Russel was so young, and the bartender was surprised. After pouring something into a glass, he handed Russel the order, but he still thought Russel was too young. Suddenly, a blue sphere appeared around Russel and the bartender. The bartender said it was the magic of sound and the other customers couldn't hear them. The bartender introduced himself, saying that his name was Jackson. He was a mage of the fire tower. He's working undercover at the Yellow Wyvern. Russel also introduced himself, and then the bartender asked him to step aside for a moment. Behind the building, Jensen told Russel that a scout troop had disappeared 3 days ago. Jackson was annoyed by this and lowered his head. Russel said the last they heard, the scouts were heading for the desert ruins. Russel asked if the scouts were trapped. Jackson said they weren't the type to act recklessly. Russel asked if Jackson had a map to the desolate ruins, and Russel said he had to save them. Jackson said it wasn't a place you could go alone. The ruins they disappeared into are near the Empire and very dangerous, so Jackson said to wait for reinforcements. At that moment, Russel realized that Jackson didn't seem to believe him, so he released his mana and showed his strength, and the bartender got scared when he saw it. Russel said he could go there himself. Jackson thought about what he'd heard about Russel reaching the 4th circle, but that was magic at least for the 5th circle, he thought. Jackson was shocked at how freely Russel handled her. Jackson weakened after such a demonstration and said that he seemed to be in a hurry. It would show him the way to the ruins, which was fine with Russel. We are transported to a place that seems to be a ruin. We see that heretic who ran away. He knelt down in front of someone and said that as ordered, they left their tracks. And now we see 2 more heretics, a man and a woman, and the man says he can already smell their blood. And here we are transported a little into the future. Russel is walking through the desert and drinking water. He thinks that if he knew this was going to happen, he would have trained ice magic. He was drenched in water because it was incredibly hot. When he reached the desolate ruins, Russel was surprised that this place was bigger than he thought. Russel began running around the ruins and studying them. He noticed many passageways, all of them leading inside. Russel thought that if it was just to find the heretics, he would blow up the ruins completely. After studying the ruins, he paused, thinking that they might have hostages right now, so Russel would have to go inside. He supposed they must have laid traps all over the place. And we see that Russel's legs were wrapped in mana, with the help of which he began to jump high and decided to jump into the hole from above through the ruins. He decided that this would be the most unexpected way, so he jumped into the ruins through a hole in the roof. Before falling, he used a wind spell. The wind caught Russel before falling and he was able to land without damage. Fortunately for Russel, there were no traps. There was a huge mural that showed a large fire-breathing dragon, and next to the dragon was a black-haired warrior. But part of the mural was destroyed, so it was impossible to see who they were fighting. While Russel was looking at the mural, a voice said that it was quite unexpected, and Russel immediately became alert. There he is, Russel thought, and then turned around. The heretic said he couldn't believe the kid from the academy had followed him. The heretic said that since Russel had come here on his own, he wouldn't have to waste his time searching. The skeletons began to surround Russel and move towards him. The heretic said that he would give him death as a reward. Russel smiled and said that the heretic was talking too much, considering how far he had run. The heretic's eyes glowed green, and he got angry and called Russel a cocky brat. Then he sent his skeleton army to attack. These are the corpses of elite warriors who died on the battlefield. They are much stronger than the skeletons in the last battle. The heretic smiled and thought about how this place would become Russel's grave. Russel's leg ignited, and then he built a wall of fire. The heretic asked if Russel was using the same magic again. Russel said it wasn't quite the same, it was something new. After all, Russel had trained more than just dragonification. He was expanding the wall of fire spell and adding a vector to its formula. We see a wall of fire pointing upwards, surrounded by an army of skeletons. Then the wall began to grow in width, and then it began to burn the skeleton army. The heretic standing around the corner was annoyed that his army was annihilated so easily. We see the silhouette of Russel, his eyes glowing red. He discovered the heretic and was walking towards him. Russel walked towards the heretic and saw exactly where he was. The heretic was terrified. He didn't want to believe that Russel was using detection magic at the same time. The heretic was terrified and wanted to run away, but Russel appeared out of nowhere and said it was too late to run. Russel struck so hard that dust rose. The heretic flew into the center of the building from the impact. He lay exhausted and could only curse. As he lay there, he wondered if this was all the heretic could do. Russel approached the heretic and told him to give up if the heretic wanted to live. The heretic chuckled and said he couldn't. He stood up and dusted himself off, then said that he didn't even own his soul. He had sold everything, even the souls of his family. He was desperate. He shouted that he had sold everything he had. Suddenly, we see 2 people in the air above Russel. They were also heretics, Demon Claw and Nightmare Tail. Russel turned around and saw them, but at the same time they hit and a cloud of dust rose up so that the hero could not be seen. And then the dust settles and we see the heretic woman laughing and saying that the stalker looks good. The man turned to the heretic and said that even though the heretic was bait, it was a pitiful sight because his opponent was only a child. The woman told the heretic that the role of a dying rat suited him. The heretic said it was him, he was their target, he was a disciple of the head of the fire tower. Hearing this, both of them flew into a rage. Judging by their reactions, it can be assumed that they hate Daria. Then a purple sphere rose from the ground, and it was Russel. He told them that pitiful people like them didn't dare say her name, and he was also furious with the heretics. A notification appeared. The mission was to fight the heretics and catch one of the 3 alive, or kill all of them, and the reward is 2 advanced mana stones. They turned to look at Russel. A heretic man with blue hair and a mask on his face said that it would have been better if Russel had just died. The red-haired heretic woman, with a creepy smile on her face, said that Daria's disciple would definitely not meet a quick death. According to her, she would kill Russel and turn him into a puppet, and then make him dance in front of the fire tower. Russel didn't say anything, but he was furious. It turns out that the heretic's name is Javier, and the blue-haired man ordered him to close the passageways. First, the man covered one passage with a huge pile of bones, and then covered the other passage with the same pile. The red-haired woman was thrilled. She said the fun was starting. Russel was a bit baffled by the fact that these heretics didn't summon the undead stealthily, but instead attacked directly. He had never met such opponents before. The heretic woman said that if he didn't attack, they would. Russel asked me to ask you a question. He asked them what they had done with the scouts who had come before him. The blue-haired male heretic didn't understand what kind of scouts Russel was talking about. The female heretic started yelling at Russel to stop trying to stall for time, and then cast the Demon Claw Sting spell. As Russel dodged this attack, he wondered how it was that they didn't know about the scouts. Then the male heretic used his whip in combat. He cast the Nightmare Tail spell. As the whip flew at him, he was still thinking about whether the heretics were faking it or not. He thought that in any case, there was always a way to find out the truth. The female heretic started yelling at him and continued to attack him. At that moment, Russel created a flame spear. With this spear, he repelled the attacks of the heretic woman. She was surprised that he was able to block it. Suddenly, the heretic shouted that he recognized this spear. He shouted that it had killed a giant skeleton. The heretic woman was happy and said she was starting to like it. She raised her 2 hands up and then used a 2-handed Demon Claw spell. She used fusion and started forming something with her mana. She ended up getting a Demon Claw spear and then asked Russel if he wanted to know which one was sharper. She looked mad. But Russel did not succumb to provocations and completely controlled his emotions. The heretic man shouted at the heretic woman not to flirt. We find out that this woman's name is Beth. She ran to attack Russel, saying that she wasn't afraid of a child. Russel was ready and had already swung his spear. And so their spears collided with each other, the end of his spear colliding with the end of hers. Beth's spear was the first to shatter, but Russel's spear continued to move. With that blow, he chopped off Beth's arm. A terrible scream filled the entire building as Beth screamed in pain. Suddenly, a male heretic cut off her head with his whip. Russel was shocked, blood splattered all over him. The male heretic only said that he had warned her not to act alone, and he didn't regret it in the least. Then the heretic began to speak. He addressed Russel as a disciple of the fire tower. The heretic recognized Russel as an opponent. He began to twist his whip and emit mana. The heretic said that from now on, he would tear Russel to pieces using all his strength. The whip was swirling around him, a spell called the Nightmare Tail Hurricane. We see Beth's decapitated body lying in front of Russel, and 2 heretics opposite him, one of whom uses a spell. Heretic said that no matter how incredible Russel is, what matters is whether he can fend off attacks from all sides. While the heretic is twisting the whip, we see that there is a fire next to him. The heretic noticed it too, but it was too late. He was shocked that Russel was already so close and attacking him. The heretic thought Russel was using a flash. We see him holding his fist in the same way that Wilson does when he uses superheat. And so Russel used a spell in which he connected the spell body of the magician and overheating. The blow almost knocked the heretic unconscious. All this time, another heretic was watching nearby, terrified. He'd seen Russel beating up a blue-haired heretic and couldn't figure out what was wrong with it at all. He fell to his knees at the thought of them losing again. He clutched his head in fear and thought that he was definitely finished now, and Russel wasn't just going to kill him. The heretic began to call them dogs, and indeed they talked so much. Suddenly, he saw a red object lying next to Beth's body. It suddenly dawned on him, it was an artifact. Meanwhile, the blue-haired heretic was spitting blood in front of Russel's feet and couldn't figure out how. The heretic said that he had stopped playing games and asked me to just kill him. But Russel told me to and just answer the questions. The first thing Russel did was ask where the scouts were. The heretic spat and then said that Russel talked about them all the time, but it was clear from the answer that the heretic didn't know. Russel speculated about whether the heretic was lying or not. At this point, the heretic decided that Russel was relaxed and that this was the heretic's chance. She wanted to grab a knife and stab Russel. At that moment, a tentacle flew towards the heretic, then it grabbed the heretic by the throat and lifted him into the air. Russel was confused. He turned around and saw the following picture. The heretic stood on a pile of bones, holding that artifact in his hands above him and repeating that he was dedicating his life force, and even death. Russel guessed that it was a sacrificial spell. The blue-headed heretic recognized the artifact in the hands of another heretic. It's the heart of a giant dragon. Then the tentacle pulled the blue-haired heretic away. The heretic's eyes glowed green as he kept repeating that he life and life energy on others, and even their death dedicated it all to someone else. We see this tentacle pulling at a blue-haired heretic who screamed that he couldn't be a part of it. But the tentacle continued to pull him right into the ribs sticking out of the pile of bones. And now the heretic was pierced by these ribs. The heretic then completed the rite and then he told the abomination to descend. And then, with the help of magic, a huge monster appeared from all this pile of stones, which exuded a huge amount of mana. Even Russel had to cover his face with his hands because he was uncomfortable with such a stream. Suddenly, a mission notification arrived. The previous mission changed, and now that all the heretics are dead, Russel needs to kill the abomination. The monster snarled. Then it looked down at itself and spoke. The monster was furious and said, "How dare Russel turn her into this?" We can see that the monster's eyes are purple. It turned out that this monster is Bet, because it uses the same spells as she used the demon fang sting right now. Bet screamed that she would tear Russel to pieces. Russel was shocked. He realized that it was the magic of that red-haired girl. And now, magic shells were being fired at Russel. These projectiles did not take him by surprise. The impact caused the entire building they were in to explode. With this blow, Bet leveled the ruins to the ground. Suddenly, a wall of fire rises. Russel still survived, but he barely made it out. Russel descended to the ground and approached the ruins. The monster couldn't stand the force and dug its own grave, Russel thought. But suddenly there was movement under the ruins. Russel was shocked by what he saw. A monster suddenly emerged from the ruins and swung at Russel, who was standing with a spear in his hands not far away. That's how this video ends. If you have sat through to the end, please don't forget to press the subscribe button and leave feedback. See you in the next video.